with her big dumb face.
The longest opening sequence.
It's on this midlife crisis.
Oh my god, it's so good, guys.
We're not told that. Yeah, we do. We're not told that. It is written. It is written.
Hello, McCurdy.
Hey, what's going on?
Hi. It's been a couple weeks. We haven't spoken to each other. We've been actively shunning each other. We've been shunting each other. Yeah,
Shaming, shunting,
Actually, not at all. You're like, where are you? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm over here. I'm over there. I had to pack up my little studio here and head off to one state and then go to another state. So we were going to TMNT it, and then we didn't. So now we're doing our second Dracula movie of the year.
Second Dracula movie of the year. Yeah.
Yeah. And is it the last?
Yes. Second yeah, it is. But
yeah, it'd be nice if there was a third to just kind of round it out.
And then we had 3 Dracula movies back to back to back. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That'd be fun. That would be fun. But do you
like
like the new setup?
There we go.
Like
oh yeah, here, let's solo you.
Yeah, look at the. So
make it do the flashy thing. Make it do the flashy thing.
Oh yeah, look at that. Look at that.
Nice.
We're up and running, baby. I can change the color here.
So I used to do that.
I can't do because they.
Can I see the remote?
Go ahead.
Can you see the remote?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I have one of those. I actually. So in the eyeballs of Film Hacker back here.
Yeah.
He's got one in each eyeball. So he used to be able to do that funky stuff, but I'd have to take them apart in order to put new eyeballs in them and do that fun stuff.
Colors. Some colors I can't do because they flicker.
Really?
But other ones are pretty good.
Show us a flicker.
Let's see. Hold on. Oh, maybe it's there we go. There's that one's flickering.
Oh, it's subtle. Yeah, very subtle.
Yeah.
Just ruining my experience.
Well, I remember working on to brag. I'm gonna not to brag. No, to brag.
Last time I was hanging out with Scorsese, he agreed.
When I worked on this movie. No, when I was on the Tomorrow War, which was originally going to be called The Ghost Draft. That was the Chris Pratt movie that was on Amazon 2 years ago.
Yeah.
When I worked on that movie, there's a whole scene where they're in a stairwell. So I would be in the tent with the DP, and he would tell me, he's like, all right, tell them to put flashlights on. And I was like, what? And he's like, you tell them to put flashlights. I was like, okay, flashlights on. And what they would have to do is they would have, he was from Australia. They would have to turn the flashlights on, but you had to, because they were LEDs, they had to make sure they had batteries in them, because if they started losing power, you'd get that flicker effect, and they didn't want that on the flashlights. So they always had to make sure that there was enough juice in each of the batteries. So I always remembered that. So ever since then, with light LED lights and flicker, it's kind of fun.
Everything's better in a British accent or whatever. SB's already talking shit, so I guess I'll
Charles looks like every West Hollywood hipster bartender in LA. I've never been to LA, so I
am right out of Peaky Blinders, sir. This is Peaky Blinders. Okay, wait, how do we switch back? Where am I at?
Which every Hollywood hipster probably
wants to be. Yeah,
probably watch the Peaky Blinders.
Speaking of British accents, don't fuck with the Peaky Blinders. So fuck you, SB.
Never seen Peaky Blinders, unfortunately.
I think I saw 2 seasons. Maybe I would certainly recommend it.
Show I should probably watch. The only clip I know is the one where he's like, "Stop fighting."
Yeah. Well, that's a meme now. No fucking fighting.
That one's a meme. That's the only one I know.
That has been memeified. But anyway, let me get into our.
Oh.
I always have to find there it is.
The thing.
There we go. My method of banishing you to the corner, which I should fix this. I should make you a little bigger because you're tiny, but I'm not going to do that.
Fine.
Now. Yeah, you're stuck in a box. Nobody puts me in a box. You can tell we haven't done this for 2 weeks. It's like,
exactly. How do we do this?
Okay. I think I'm good to go. All right. And again, as usual, I might sound a little hard on this movie. I don't hate this movie, but I'm curious. I'm curious what you might think here. Okay. The Last Voyage of the Demeter is a decent movie, no question about it. It's well made and at times has genuine moments of horror. Unfortunately, it's another example of one of these movies that just doesn't carry the ball far enough to deserve remembrance. It is exactly what one expects and nothing more. And I hate saying this about a movie that has the balls to kill a child. But overall, this small story, such as it is, would have been better off remaining as a part of a larger one. And when tasked with pinpointing exactly what's missing, I believe it to be a certain amount of cleverness within the confines of the premise. As a big fan of this brand of story, both horror and a bunch of people trapped in a confined space within a desperate situation genres. I'm going to read that again because I said confined weird. Both horror and a bunch of people trapped in a confined space within a desperate situation genres, what's needed is some clever setup and payoff, especially because we as an audience already know that this is Dracula. Especially because we as an audience already know that this Dracula tale is going to end in tragedy. Instead, what we get in the end is more or less going through the motions as each cast member gets picked off one by one without any fulfillment of character or personal sacrifice or anything that may have made this story more than just scraping the bottom of the Dracula lore barrel. Overall, it's like
That's a no. That is
movie-
Charlie. That's a fair assessment.
Okay.
That is a fair assessment of the film. That's
Cool.
We'll talk about it. I have a lot to
Yeah.
talk about with this one. This was a movie
Yeah.
I was looking forward to seeing, but fortunately, it wasn't. It definitely left more to be desired, as I like to say now.
It's one of those where I half expect you to come in saying, yeah, that's fair. And the other half is saying, you might say that thing where you're like, it's good and you're too hard on it. And if it's not perfect, you hate it. And I'm like, I liked it, but it was in the end, it needed to nail the ending for it to be anything that's like worth watching again in my life.
We'll talk. Let's gloss over everything that you need to know behind the scenes of this movie first, and then we'll definitely talk about it because there's a lot to talk about with this movie. First up, Rank store, and I have to show you something though because I finally got my Rank shirt. You too can own your own
Turn
personal.
Turn around. Are you able to turn around? There's a QR code on the back.
QR. I feel like you need to update these.
You can
like
barely see it.
Yeah, it's there.
Like a new. Oh, I see it. Yeah.
You should get
I got this copy of Dracula.
Oh, nice.
And inside of it is what I just got, which is a
you got your sticker?
sticker /
Nice.
bookmark.
Nice.
Anyway,
go
ahead, sir.
All right, let's talk about The Last Voyage of the Demeter. This is directed by Andre Overdale.
So they said Demeter. You and I would say Demeter because we grew up with a guy whose last name was Demeter.
Sorry, I have the wrong.
But they kept saying Demeter.
I got the wrong slide. Sorry, hold on. The Last Voyage of the Demeter. Yeah, in the movie they say the Demeter. I heard Demeter when I first read it. Directed by Andre Overdale. Screenplay by Bragi Schutt Jr. I'm gonna butcher the shit out of that name. And then you've got Zach Olewski, based on the Captain's Log from Dracula by Bram Stoker. And as we talked about earlier, yes. So this is the second film this year based off of Bram Stoker's classic novel Dracula. The previous film being Renfield, focused on the titular character in the modern setting as Dracula's familiar, also distributed by Universal Studios. This time we get a whole film dedicated to the 7th chapter of the book titled The Captain's Log. For those who have never read Dracula, the book is told through journal entries, diaries, recordings, letters, newspaper articles, etc. It's what they call an epistolary novel because it's all done through. You're never told directly. It's all through different things you read, like
different people's accounts that they themselves have written.
Exactly.
But
it's all like different styles
of that. This would be a written history versus an oral. Go read World War Z, and that's like an oral history of all these people kind of speaking to, like, all these interviews with people after the fact. This is just like page 1 is like from so and so's diary, and then from somebody else's.
And then you're
diary.
reading like Jonathan. I think it's Jonathan Harker's diaries, the first entry.
Yeah,
and then
Jonathan Harker's journal continued, so on and so forth. So when you get to whatever chapter this is,
chapter 7. Chapter 7.
Yeah, and it's just it's from a news person, and then
it's 3 different things because it's Mina who's writing a letter to somebody, or it's Mina's diary, but then there's a newspaper clipping in that diary, and then within that newspaper thing. You read the newspaper's report, and then they're like,
The
oh, this is what
log.
the ship log was. So it's
Yeah.
like you're kind of going in through multiple different things, which
Yeah.
is kind of cool.
Which is,
So
so
in the
then in,
seventh
in this
chapter,
movie they find they're like the it opens with like, here's the log, I found the log, and then from there the movie opens.
So here's what I read. In the 7th chapter, we learned that during a terrible storm, there was been this mysterious Russian ship that was run aground on the shores of Whitby, England, which is approximately 250 miles away from London, where he ends up at. So I just want to point that out. It's like he ends up rather far from London, where Dracula was supposed to land. A black dog is seen running away from the ship, which we never saw in this movie, which I was a little disappointed by. The local Coast Guard finds the ship's crew are nowhere to be found except for the body of a man tied to the helm of the ship. In his possession is a bottle with a note inside, which is an addendum to the ship's log. In the log, we learn that the ship left from Bulgaria in the beginning of July, much like this film. They do keep track with that, and made its way to England. Crew members report a tall, thin man on board. The crew goes missing one by one, but the captain isn't sure if this is because the crew are jumping off or because of the rocky weather. Finally, it's down to him and the first mate, who eventually the first mate ends up killing himself. The captain ties himself to the ship and goes to go down like a man. So it's pretty clear that they made a lot of changes to this film for this film. Some changes I get, others I think are kind of weak. You and I will talk about that. This film also takes place...
He tied himself to
the helm of the ship.
The helm.
The wheel.
But secured himself with a crucifix, like with a with the beads, the rosary, like a rosary with a crucifix, so that the devil, so that Dracula couldn't untie his hands, right? Like he secured himself with a crucifix, so which is kind of a cool detail, but that's not in the movie.
That's not. There's another
roughly, but not really.
You're opening up so many cans of worms of things. I know. That, like as a fan of who read the book, like after you read the book, you're like instantly a fan. Yeah. But then there's like little nitpicks here and there with this movie that I'm like, I can't help but make because of the things that the implications of those things that's kind of frustrating. The log entries also match the time frame in the book from July to August. So like basically this chapter ends in August 3rd, and this movie is like, oh, they need to get there by August 6th or something like that. And it takes place in 1897, where the book was published in 1897. So that's kind of a cool little neat detail with those. And of course, we'll talk more and more about how more about the book and the movie as we talk about this. Next, we got story by, I'm going to, again, butchering his name, Brage Schutz Jr. So Schutz actually began this project over 20 years ago. He originally wanted to write something in space, but they all became Alien spinoffs, or Alien ripoffs is where you see where this is going. Yeah. When he came to Hollywood, he got a job at a model building shop. And one of the model builders he had became friends with built the Demeter, for Bram Stoker's Dracula in 1992. So the Francis Ford Coppola movie, there was a model made of that ship, and he thought, oh, this is really cool. What's this from? And he's like, oh, it's from Bram Stoker's. Then he realized it clicked with him. That's when he was like, oh, that's what I want to write. He said, and this is where he had thought adapting the chapter from the book to a film. So it's Alien, the movie Alien. That's why I put that joke in there. It's the movie Alien set to late 1800s. Yep. I will say, when I first read it, I felt the same thing as I was reading the book. I was like, oh my God, that whole chapter, that thing that they mentioned, that's the movie Alien, like shrunk down very, like,
you have to wonder.
That's it.
You have to wonder, because obviously Dracula way predates Alien. So was there any influence? Right. Was there, at all, or was it?
That's where I feel like
the guy who wrote
Dracula's
Alien. Did the guy who wrote Alien?
There was multiple guys.
Dracula,
right. I would not be surprised if he did, but like once you read Dracula, after you've read it, you're like, there are a lot of connections to other horror movies, other movies in general that you can tie and be like, that's kind of out of Dracula, almost this. Yeah. Like even like things like there's a whole scene where I'm like, I can't not think of Ghostbusters when it's like the suitors and Van Helsing are going to the crypt to kill Lucy. I'm like, that feels like, a bunch of dudes are like, oh yeah, we're gonna go hunt the vampires, we're gonna go get the monster or whatever. Like, or even Stranger Things, like all that stuff. Like you can kind of trace it back to Dracula.
Yeah, and the log of the Demeter is like 5 pages. You know, so it's
it's not
like
very long.
it like to
You can find it
claim
on YouTube for like 30-minute read of it on YouTube for like, yeah, it's
of the whole
anywhere.
book.
I will. Okay, so then this film had gone through development hell since 2003. So they had a script. There was a version of this movie floating around Hollywood that they were going to make this. And at one point, Ben Kingsley and Noomi Rapace were going to play in the movie. Rapace was in Prometheus, which is kind of a weird, nice little tie-in right there. But eventually, of course, because of Prometheus, she couldn't do it. And then this film didn't get off the ground finally until 2019 and was filmed in Berlin and Malta in 2021. So it has been a couple of years. It's like they probably had this in the can and they didn't know when to release it. And they're like, okay, let's dump it into August. And so that's kind of what they did. Next, we got our director, Andre Overdale, and I think the O's got a little slash in it because it's Norwegian. He's probably best known for Troll Hunter, which I never saw. I remember seeing the trailer for him, like, oh, that looks neat. And then he also did Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. I don't know if you remember that, Charlie, the book series as a kid.
I remember the book, but the series I'm saving for this October. You have to save some horror movies for October, so you have something fresh. I'll be watching it for the first time then.
Yeah, the movie. I didn't see the movie, so I don't know anything about it. But yeah, it was based off the kids' book series, which is kind of a neat little.
I just know it's like an anthology type of thing, just a bunch of like I think Guillermo del Toro is maybe the lead, and then just a bunch of little one-off stories. But yeah, I mean those books terrified me as a kid, so I look forward to watching it.
Then we've got Corey Hawkins plays Clemens. Hawkins has a Broadway background. He appeared in the 6th and 7th seasons of The Walking Dead, and then got a lead in the 24 Legacy show, which I never watched. He was Dr. Dre in Straight Outta Compton, which we kind of mentioned like 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's a decent enough movie. Also had a role in Kong Skull Island.
I'll go on record. I love that movie.
Got to show off his Broadway chops in The Heights, which also stars at least 2 other people that earlier this year have starred in 2023 movies. We got, if I had zoomed in there, you could see, but the girl in that, she was in Scream 6, and then the main lead, he was in Transformers Rise of the Beast. And then the other girl that's in it, she was supposed to be Batgirl, but that film got canned. So, and I think her sister is the Little Mermaid in the Disney Little Mermaid. So, it's just like,
I know they're a sisters thing.
Yeah, you see the new class of actors, as the more you do these things, the new rising stars, as the more you do these things. I think it's kind of fun. We've got Aisling Ferranski, plays Anna.
Game of Thrones. Wow.
I didn't know who she was. She's an Irish actress. She's mainly known for her role as Lyanna Stark. She plays Jon Snow's mother, who is kind of like the big reveal of the series.
Of the whole series, The
whole series, this is what was leading up to. And then she's been in other movies, but nothing I think most people would know. And then, of course, we got Liam Cunningham, from Game of Thrones, most known for Davos, who basically plays kind of the similar character. He's supposed to be a smuggler, but he was like a sea captain type. He's been in other movies. He was in... but most people know him from Game of Thrones. I put The Mummy. He was in the last Mummy film of the Brendan Fraser era that didn't do very well. And he was also in a movie called Harry Brown, which I really like. It's a movie where Michael Caine plays an old man vigilante, and it's awesome. That movie's awesome. You should see it. Have you seen it?
No.
Harry Brown. You should see it.
I have not. Harry Brown.
This guy I wrote a lot about. So we got David.
We just saw him in Oppenheimer.
And he was in Oppenheimer. I didn't realize he wasn't. I was like, did I even mention he was in Oppenheimer? I think
you did.
So dude's got an impressive resume. First, probably saw him in The Dark Knight, where he was interrogated by Batman. He's been in 3 of Denis Villeneuve films. He also was in this year's list topper Oppenheimer, which we just talked about. Also failed to mention even his character, even though his character was absent from your favorite movie this year, Charlie, Ant-Man and Quantum Baskin Robbins. He plays Veb. I didn't know this. He plays Veb, that creature with the ooze that allows everyone to
with the holes.
Him doing the voice of that. Yeah,
the guy talking about.
So they were
holes.
They're like, we're not going to have your character in the movie, but we're still going to have you in the movie. He's like, all right, cool, whatever. I'm still getting a paycheck. And then also, this is a fun little detail. So he actually wrote a comic called Count Crowley,
No
which
way.
is kind of in this, and it's signed by him. I think, yeah, it's signed by him.
Nice.
I got this online. I think somebody got it signed, but yeah. But it's plays into the same Dracula horror film, so you can tell he's a fan of the genre. He's probably was total game for this movie when he went to audition for it.
Yeah.
And then we've got the supporting cast. There's a bunch of other supporting cast. Many of the basically the people who just go dead left and right. I didn't know who they were. If they were in a television show, I'm sorry. They didn't. No one knows who they are. We got Woody Norman plays Toby, the kid. He's an up and coming.
He's
Not
good.
much to tell about him.
Yeah.
He was good.
Yeah.
We got Javier Batet. I think that's how you say his name. He plays Dracula. He's mainly plays skinny creature roles, sort of like Doug Jones. You know, Doug Jones. He's from Indiana, but he's the guy who he was in Shape of Water. He was in Hellboy.
Yeah.
He's been in a bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of
you hardly ever see his face. He's just like a body actor.
Right. But this guy does kind of the same thing. He has super long fingers due to Marfan syndrome, which is the reason why he's elongated. He also has been in Game of Thrones. He played one of the Whites in Game of Thrones. He was in Conjuring 2. He was in It and It 2. And then, of course, he was in Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, which is the same director. So it makes perfect sense why they ended up, come play Dracula for this movie, but play like Count Orlok version of him that's kind of more of a monster than anything
Bring
else.
your big fingers with you.
Bring your big fingers, if you know what I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Then we got Stefan Kapikic. Again, not great with names. He plays Olgarin. He was born in West Germany. You probably know him as Colossus in the Deadpool films, which I didn't realize that was the same guy.
Wow.
But basically the dude. Yeah, that dude who was like he turns. That's and he apparently also speaks Serbian, English, German, and Russian. So very talented.
Okay.
Very talented. Cool. But Charlie, that's really all I've got for as far as the things you should know about this movie. There's not much to say other than that.
Otherwise, do you have like an initial feel here on this guy? And I will point out that the previous Dracula movie is at their number 25.
I think this is the weaker of the two Dracula movies.
I agree, and I agree. I think my initial reaction, just thinking on terms of that, was because of the having a theme and nailing that theme. Like let me jump back a couple weeks. So when we did Haunted Mansion. Right. I said my biggest problem with this is that there is no plot. And you said there is a plot. And I said, okay, yes, technically it's difficult to have a movie without a plot. You have to go into like avant-garde movies to find a movie without a plot. But my point there was that was my point there was that there was a decent story, but a really weak plot because there wasn't something from scene to scene, from beat to beat, carrying us through Haunted Mansion. It was mostly just people saying random stuff, and it was like there's
going back to that movie, Charlie. Going back to that movie real quick. The thing that I'm like I see where you're saying this is the scene where he just finds out that Tiffany Haddish's character can speak to the dead, and then he's like, it's like we're on this trajectory, bro. Like we're trying to figure this thing out, and then all of a sudden you want to stop the movie to find out about your wife, like.
Yeah.
So I get what you're saying.
But also constantly stopping the movie to like tell dumb jokes and like it was a mess. Like again, it's like I guess the plot was we're stuck. We can't go home because ghosts keep bringing us back. My whole point though, without rehashing it, is that was an okay story but a terrible plot. Whereas with this is a good plot. There's something carrying us from beginning to end that makes sense. Again, just like Alien, it's like we're trapped in a confined space in a desperate situation because we're running out of food with a creature on board and we don't know what it is and we don't know how to kill it. And we never even see it. Anybody who sees it just dies anyway, unless they catch like little glimpses of it. Weird things are happening because people are getting bit and they're turning into these creatures. Like they're becoming zombified. We don't know what's happening. So the plot is good, but the story overall is kind of weak. There are themes. There's like this constant recurring theme about science versus superstition, right? Because you have this doctor on board who wasn't in the book, but he's added to this story to kind of give us somebody's perspective. So the doctor is like, I believe in science, but there's and I need to make sense of the world. Like his whole thing, like which that was something that I saw myself in him, because that's how I've always seen myself, is I'm constantly trying to make sense of things, trying to make sense of the world in front of me. So I was like, that's kind of a decent theme, I guess. Let's see where they go with it. And it's like, at the end of the day, it's just like the theme is that the world is indifferent and uncaring and dangerous, and then you die. And it's like, I don't know, like, was that really fulfilled, or is that just kind of obvious in a horror movie? So that's what I mean, where overall a good plot, again, a thing, a mission, a goal, an understanding of what this thing is from beat to beat, from story moment to moment. But overall, a story that was like, I guess, trying to fulfill certain themes and like maybe not really exploring them, or maybe unnecessarily exploring them. But then on top of that, that all led to an ending that was, like we've had a couple movies this year that are like, take something like Megan, which it's like, it's following a path, and then it just leads to like some epic battle at the end. And this epic battle was just like Dracula's flying around and they're shooting at him, but meanwhile, to jump back 20 minutes, there was a moment, and there's with movies like this, there's always that fun moment where it's like, okay, enough's enough. We all know there's a threat here. Search the ship, search every bit of it. Here's the plan. We're gonna get him to go into the cargo hold. We're gonna nail down the cargo hold. We're gonna scuttle the ship, and this weird devil is gonna drown. And so it's like, okay, now we have a plan, but there wasn't any kind of like creative fulfillment of that plan, which would require some kind of setup and payoff over time. Like they would set up certain things, like you would knock, right? You would knock on one part of the ship, and then at another part you could hear it. And so it's like,
and everyone had their own knock. Was it like everyone had their own specific knock?
I only ever heard one knock. It was
I didn't understand it. Like they were like, oh yeah, you can hear it throughout the whole ship, and it was like an echo, and I was like, cool. But I didn't get I honestly, I was like confused by that whole thing. I was like, so is it supposed to be a communication thing? Like I didn't get the problem with that was the setup for it was kind of weak, where it was just the kid showing the guy around the ship, and then it was like, he shows the knock, and then I'm like,
later the Germanic guy says, knock, it saves the pipes. Like, and what I believe he meant was it saves you from having to yell a lot. So just knock if you need me. So anytime somebody would knock, the other person would come on deck. But it was something where you're like, is this ever going to be used in some clever way, or like, did Dracula ever knock to bring somebody out?
There was a
we
scene
should have seen Dracula knock at some point, so somebody comes out and they get taken. Like something. But
okay, I have so many nitpicks I want to start with. Right. Okay, first nitpick.
Okay, wait. Hang on.
Have to start. No.
I think I. Sorry, I think I.
Way to list.
No.
Sorry. I would agree where we'd put it.
No. Excuse me. You go ahead.
Okay. My first overall nitpick is like, and this is when I knew the movie was in trouble. Right when the movie started, was we're sitting in the theater, and I'm like, okay, gonna get a movie. Cool. Sitting there with my friend, and then the opening of the movie starts with the title card, and like sometimes you do that. You have like some poetic or some quote.
This was it. Yeah,
some quote. It's always some quote, right?
Okay, go ahead.
Well, the movie starts with a quote, and the quote's literally, it's not a quote, it's just saying, this is the voyage of the Demeter. And it's from Bram Stoker's Dracula. And I was like, why would you announce that in the movie? Like, I was so mad. I was like, why would you put that in the beginning of the movie and just stating like, yeah, this is based off of this chapter in Bram Stoker's movie? And I'm like, why would you tell the audience that? Like, don't tell the audience. I don't want to know that. I don't want to know that. Like,
because it's unimportant.
You don't need. Well, here's the problem. Now you're like setting yourself up because you're like, this is based off a thing. It's like you don't have faith in your movie. You don't have faith enough in your story and in the plot to just be like, this is gonna get you in. Like, here's if I did a rewrite. Like, one of the first things I would have done. One, don't show the ship being maroon or gone ashore in the beginning of the movie like it does in the beginning of the movie, because the beginning of the movie starts off where you see the ship. And it's like coming towards shore. And that's how it is in the book, though. Like in the book, and you find out that it runs aground.
We got the log, sir.
You found the log, and then it's like, then we find out what happened.
Yeah.
I would have rather it started off where we meet the characters. They're already in Bulgaria. and and it's like it's mysterious in that we don't know why, because like a great movie that they're emulating, they know they're emulating, is Alien. And the great thing about that movie
were they
is
though?
it's
Was that
about a
talked
bunch of
about? Did they talk about
Yes,
that? Did they ever say?
that's literally, like, I was doing my research. That's what both the
You said the
director
writer,
and the writer.
but you said the writer
The
was
writer
like.
and the
You said he wrote versions of a story, but it always
kept
ended up
coming back
looking
to
like a
Alien
clone of
ripoff.
Alien, right?
And then
Yeah,
when
because
he
he wanted to
find,
do it in
but even
space.
he's literally even quoting that, like, when he figured out, like, oh, this would be a cool idea for a story is to do this. And I remember like the first time I read this book, which was literally last year, I was like, oh my God, like that would make a great movie. It's just that chapter, because that's basically Alien, but it takes place in the late 1800s, turn of the century, and like you have a story. The problem is how they set that story up. I didn't think worked. I thought there was better ways of handling that. One of which it would have been nice is if they got to Bulgaria and the crew had been around for a while, and it's not like they had to pick up new crew. It's like this was a tight-knit group. So then we kind of have that same thing with Alien, or an Alien. It's like they're all like they've been doing this for a while. They all function in that same regard. And then they're mysteriously told, like, hey, whoever owns us, or our company, we have this job we got to do. We got to take these crates and boxes. Again, it's in the novel. They have
dirt.
To take the
They're
dirt.
just like they're dirt.
It's like, why dirt? That even raises questions. Like, why are we taking boxes of dirt? Like, that's really weird.
She never explained that. I expected so at some point one of the boxes is opened and there's a woman in there, and they're like, oh, she's a stowaway, which I like that they immediately assume she's a stowaway, because of course they would. And then he starts to kind of the doctor starts to bring her back. I think the way they took her character is questionable, but at least yes, I agree. But just so far as like her being there, you would assume she was a stowaway, so that all checks out. And then they have that discussion about, like, do we just throw her over the side? And the captain's like, this is my last voyage. I'm not going to have a young dead woman on my conscience, because because the first mate is just like a no bullshit Russian guy who's just like, no, this is stowaway, they die. So but like what I expected, though, honestly, because you've read the novel,
it's somewhat fresh
but
in
I don't
my
think
mind.
I thought I did. I don't think I've read the whole thing. I need to make a point of doing that, because I've read like all the other classic horror novels, but I think Dracula is one that I've read.
It's one that you should definitely you should read it, audiobook it, whatever you need to do.
But I don't think in full. But my point being that with I expected her to be one of a few Bride of Draculas, because didn't he bring like 3 wives over?
So that's okay. Here's why. Well, I don't remember him. Okay, here's the thing. In the book, so first, let's just go back to the book real quick. In the book, the book is kind of broken up. You could almost break that book up into different horror movies in itself, because
hence this movie.
But the Jonathan Harker part of the book, which is the beginning of the book, Jonathan Harker is like this real estate guy from London who's been sent over to Romania to the Carpathian Mountains up to Transylvania to find Dracula. You go, and everyone's telling him, like, you shouldn't go here. It's this bad omen. He goes to this castle. He meets this really old man. If you've seen the Bram Stoker's 1992 Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola, it's very similar to that. It's pretty much closest. It's the closest thing to the novel. He goes
he
there.
Thinks he's just an old guy. Like he has no idea what's.
But he's told, hey, you need to, set my affairs in order. I'm trying to go to London. And he's like, okay. But like eventually he has these weird visions of this really strange shit that's happening with Dracula, like climbing on the walls and all this. And he's not sure. And like, he thinks he's going mad. Like, again, this is the late 1800s, the way that the framework of the context of how people would write this stuff. It's like, he thinks he's going crazy, and Dracula leaves him there, and he leaves him. But like, he's told, don't wander around the castle. He wanders around the castle. He ends up seeing 3 of Dracula's concubines. So that's in the novel. What happens is Dracula comes in and saves him from them by throwing a baby wrapped in a small child wrapped in a bag, and throws it to the 3 concubines. So they eat the baby instead, and he takes Jonathan Harker away. So he gets basically stuck there. And then Dracula leaves him. And this is the first thing that bothered me about the movie, was that in the book that Dracula has followers. Like, there are people that like
like support him, and they're gypsies, and they kind of establish that in the movie where they're like these gypsies that live somewhere in Romania. They're like kind of friendly with Dracula essentially, and because Dracula pays them well and everything, and he even pays them to like protect him and stuff. And in the movie, it was like it was weird because I'm like, so why are they doing this? Is because they want to get rid of Dracula? Is that why they're like, we're gonna put him in a box and then put him on the ship? Is that the motivation there? So I was like, okay, I guess that's what it is.
Are you still talking book, or are you talking about movie?
Still
now?
talking book to movie now, like book to movie.
Okay.
But in this movie, it's like they bring the boxes of dirt there, and then they're warning them. It's like, you don't want to be on this boat, and you're like, okay, like why? But like in the movie, or sorry, in the book, it's like, no, they're supporters. They bring him. It's like almost just a business transaction. It's like, yep, you take these boxes of dirt, take them to London. They're supposed to go to this person in London. He's gonna get them, and then
what is
they're
it again?
Go to different parts.
A vampire has to sleep in the earth
He has to sleep in
his country, right? Or like of
Yeah.
his home or whatever.
Yeah,
So
of his homeland. So he brings several boxes of dirt. So again, this is going back to the book. In the books, he brings several crates of dirt. I think most people, when they think of Dracula, they think of like the coffin, the classic Universal monster movie, just a tiny coffin. No, he's talking about these giant crates of dirt. He brings multiple crates of dirt with him because he takes them and he goes to different locations in London, and he stows these different crates of dirt, so he has places that he can basically hide. Which later in that novel, like Van Helsing and the suitors, they all go around and start putting holy water on all these things of dirt and trying to stop Dracula. Better movie. Let me move on. Sorry. Better movie. Let me move on. So when we get to this movie, it's like, if I rewrote it, I would have said, start the movie off just the perspective of the people on the ship. Don't frame it in the beginning where it's like this ship runs around. Like, I don't want to know that. Like, just let it run. Where it's like, we have these group of sailors. And like, let me know why does this one sailor have, like, why does the captain have his grandson? Like, I want to know more about that backstory. That would have given more of like
lack of characterization, unfortunately, was a big thing here. And a lot of the deckhands,
like, it felt like
there's only a few. There's a lot of deckhands, and some of them you can parse out, but others they looked a lot alike. They behaved the same way, to where it was just like generic deckhand guy, when you could easily have characterized everybody. And what would have helped that is, as you're saying, to start with their voyage in, and then from there, maybe they have somebody, like you said, whatever Dracula cult people are like setting up the business deal of like, I need you to send these boxes of dirt, and they're like, boxes of dirt? Like, that would have raised some red flags,
right?
But it's like, okay,
well, like, maybe they need the money. Maybe they're like, oh, we really need this money. We got to take this job. And here's the other thing.
You know what I'm saying? Like, why would you send boxes of dirt? It'd be like if I was like, hey, McCurdy, do you have an envelope? And you're like, why? I'm like, I'm gonna send this used condom to my mom. And you're like, why would you? It's like, no, but I'll pay you $100 to mail it. And you're like, okay, this is weird. I don't know why you're sending a used condom to your mom, but like, okay. And you give me the envelope and the postage, and I give you $100. But point being that would have been more interesting. That would have set up, like, especially for people who haven't read the book, who maybe don't even know, because a question I sometimes have in my head as I'm watching movies like this that are just kind of mediocre, like they just don't hit, they don't have that remembrance factor, is I always sit there thinking, what if this was the first movie I'd ever seen in my life?
Right.
And if it's the first movie you've ever seen in your life, you're like, wow, this is incredible, because it's like real life, but it's not, and you would remember it, and all these characters would hit really heavy, and when they died, it would shock you. And so I'm trying to parse out being like a virginal moviegoer versus being like an old moviegoer who's seen everything and takes stuff like this for granted, and whatnot. But all the same, it's like, all the same, there's just a lack of characterization that leads to like, when some of the guys die, it's like genuinely terrifying. Like the first guy we see killed, he just sees Dracula kind of like crawling, like minus the things that happen in the shadows, right? Minus the things that happen early on that just kind of indicate something's up. I'm talking about the first kill that we see, and he just sees Dracula kind of like crawling out, like weakly crawling out onto the deck. And he's like, what the hell? And then Dracula leaps at him, cuts his throat, and then just kind of like crawls on top of him and is like grabs his hand with his big fingers and just starts sucking him dry. And it's genuinely horrific. It's actually a good moment. Then fast forward to when the kid gets killed. The kid is just like, turns out he's just kind of locked away with Dracula in the captain's quarters, and Dracula just grabs him and bites into him. And it's tragic. I mean, any movie that has the balls to kill a kid, I mean, that's wild, right? That's wild. But everybody else, eventually they're just kind of picked off one by one, just kind of like more or less unceremoniously, not interestingly, not cleverly. And then that all leads up to the worst moment in the movie. Do you remember the worst moment in the movie? If I just throw that vague title out?
Yeah, sure. What's the
So we're down to two people. We're down to Clemens, who's the doctor, and then we're down to the bride of Dracula, right? Who, like the supposed bride of Dracula.
Like they never.
They never specify that, but that's
okay.
what I
Tell
just
me
kept
the scene.
saying.
Tell me what the worst scene is, real quick.
Okay,
and we'll talk.
The worst moment where it really just became like generic as fuck. Whereas it should have been the best moment was Dracula's down to just the two of them and grabs Clemens, who is Dr. Dre, grabs Dr. Dre by the throat and cuts him across the jugular. But I mean, he doesn't bleed out. He just like, I guess, barely grazes him. I guess, even though he cut him pretty deep. And the woman just yells out, "Die, you devil!" And so for some reason, Dracula stops what he's doing to turn around and face her, because like for some reason he cared that she yelled out, "Die, you devil!" I guess. And she'd cut something or done something to make one of the masts or something fall and hit Dracula so that they could jump off the boat. And then I think maybe something caught fire. I don't know. Something happened. And then Dracula just literally just goes like, "Fuck this." And he just like pushes the mast away and he's good to go. And it was building up to like maybe something like it had a chance to do something worthy of remembrance, but because it didn't nail that climax, that's when I was like, okay, now it's set in stone. This movie's just kind of like gonna be forgotten, unfortunately.
There's a lot.
But
of
that
things.
moment, "Die, you devil!"
Things.
"Die, you devil!" Do you remember her saying "Die, you devil"?
I don't remember.
She yells out
to that point.
"Die, you devil!"
Remember,
and he drops Dr. Dre, like just like lets go of him, and he turns around like an idiot, and then the mast hits him. But it was so just like, this is the best you got after 20 years of working on this script. That's your big climactic moment. Yeah. It's embarrassing. It's just like
I felt like this movie, again, there's just so many little things that I'm like, I wish I would have tweaked and fixed. Like, okay, let's just specifically talk about the girl real quick.
Yeah.
And let me be sexist for like 5 minutes real quick. Her character felt like it was a tacked on character because they were like, I feel like Hollywood producers were like, "Oh shit, we just wrote a movie with just a bunch of dudes.
Yeah.
We need to put some women in this movie." And they're like, I'm like, okay, well, who's this girl that we're going to put in this movie? She's from the village and she's one of his concubines. Is she a concubine? Well, kind of.
It was like sacrifice to him. According to her,
right.
It was like she was given as a tribute. Like you know how it's like, give your virgins to the monster, like the
okay,
like a tribute.
I missed that aspect of it.
That was my interpretation of it. She was like, I grew up in a village.
Tacked her on.
Yes, I grew up in a village that was like everything was run by Dracula. Everybody lived in fear of Dracula, and so I was given to him to be a bride of Dracula, and he would feed on me and do whatever he wanted. He would turn me into a vampire. He would just use me for blood, and so he. Instead of the 3 brides and 3 concubines, all that crap, they throw that out. And it's just like Dracula is thinking to himself, I need to get to London, so I'm going to bring with me a snack. And so he brought with him this woman who every night he would creep out and he would feed on her. And then he would go back to his coffin. And I think the understanding is that because Dracula didn't want to kill everybody on the ship. The understanding is that they took his snack away. And so he then had to feed on everybody else, right?
Wow.
If they hadn't have done that, he would have just kept feeding on her until getting to London, because it's not in Dracula's best interest to eat everybody because they're getting him to his new land in London where he would then be able to feed on the entire population. So it was that way. And even like, okay, so he finds Dr. Dre finds Bride of Dracula in the dirt because for some reason she fell out of her box.
So that scene in the movie, like again, we talked about Alien, right? Like I will equate this movie to Alien every day. Like I'll just be like, you can see the framework where it's like this was supposed to be Alien in the late 1800s on a cargo ship, and that's what Alien is. This is just like this version is this is like an old timey version, right?
Even down to
so when they go to the cargo
scene. Take the stomach bursting scene, and I give you the scene where the German guy's tied to the mast,
right?
And the sun creeps up on him, and he explodes into fire.
He explodes, sure. Like that. There's you can see that correlation. I think like there's not a 1-to-1, of course, because I think this is when we start to begin to talk about the rules of Dracula, which also frustrated the hell out of me because this movie. It does create at least one solid rule, and that is that sunlight is how you kill these creatures or whatever. Like they did establish that, and that was like probably the best sunlight killing, eat your heart out Twilight type of thing, where it's like, they go into sunlight and they just burst into flames, and that part was like the one thing in the movie as far as the lore goes that I was like, oh, okay, I applaud you for that. Like that looks cool. I thought what was frustrating was they don't really. I just felt like they never set up a really clear the biting Dracula thing because and maybe it's just because I'm confused because I'd recently read Salem's Lot, I'd watched this movie, I read the book, so there's like a lot of connection with Dracula and vampires and stuff. But like the stuff with him giving her blood transfusions, well, that's something that's in the book with another character who gives blood transfusions to him and Van Helsing give blood transfusions to another victim of Dracula, and they don't know that in the book. You don't know that's you're led to believe it. Basically, what happens is there's a character named Lucy. She's friends with Mina. Mina is
isn't Lucy kind of like literally Lucy? Like she's kind of loose.
She's got. So when I say the suitors, there are 3 men, all that are vying for her affection. One of them is like her fiance. There's another guy who's kind of more like a Wild West type dude. There's a doctor. And then I think there's like one other one. I can't remember all of them, but they're all vying for her affections. She mysteriously starts going ill, and as you're reading the book, you're like, oh, Dracula bit her, but Dracula's going into her room every night and sucking her blood, and eventually she dies. And I think this is also, I don't know enough about tuberculosis, but apparently I think it has some kind of connection with that. So the doctor and Van Helsing come to her and they give her blood transfusions, and they're like, oh, she looks better. She looks great. Maybe we cured her. And then the next night they come back and then she's not healed. And then Van Helsing's like, oh, I know what's going on. And so that's when he puts all this garlic and all this stuff out. And obviously he somehow knows all this stuff about vampires that they don't know about. There's little things like that I wish that they'd put in this movie. Yeah. Because like I felt like the rules were all based off what I knew kind of vaguely in my head. And so I was like, they don't mention garlic. It would have been nice since, we killed all the animals. What do we have left to eat? Oh, no, we have garlic. And then somehow you could have used garlic somewhere.
You had a whole cook character, Yeah, the crucifixes thing was annoying.
That thing really frustrated me because I felt like ever since Blade, and I think people have talked about this before, but like, I think it was what was his name? The guy who's the son of the director who directed the Twilight Zone movie, and then he directed a bunch of movies. Max, whatever his name is. No. He's a writer in Hollywood. He wrote Chronicle. He's the guy who wrote Chronicle. He did a video.
The guy with the guy with the rainbow hair.
He sometimes has rainbow hair. He doesn't have. He had rainbow hair at one point.
Yeah.
But yes, that guy.
He's on Red Letter Media all the time.
He did a video about I think it was the death of Superman or something about that, and he was talking about how like his dad was like, how do you kill vampires? He's like, oh, you do this. He's like, doesn't matter, you can kill vampires however you want, they don't exist. And I'm like, ever since then I feel like certain aspects of the lore have been changed so drastically where it's like, like like the Twilight series, instead of them bursting into flames when they're out in sunlight, they sparkle. Or like this, it's like, oh, you got to have a stake through the heart. And like when you read the book, they don't put a stake in his heart. They cut his head off with knives. Like that's how he dies in the book. So there's like little things like that where I was like when they're trying to figure out how to kill him, like they don't even really know. And like when you've
heard me go off on stuff like this, that with horror, not all the time, it's not some blanket law, but generally speaking, you have to establish rules. And I talked about this previously about The Conjuring. What I like about The Conjuring is it puts into perspective why hauntings happen the way they do. It's like, why is the door shut? Why do you hear voices? Because slowly,
Conjuring or Insidious?
Conjuring, they lay out, the Warrens lay out these rules. They're like, they're like hauntings, possessions take place slowly. It's like little things first, and then it becomes bigger things. And the whole point is that it's essentially lowering your immune system so that you can be possessed easy. That's why I love The Conjuring, because once you watch enough haunted house movies, you're like, why do the ghosts keep blowing out candles and stupid shit? Like, why don't they just pop out and just like give the person a heart attack? Well, Conjuring puts it in perspective. Therefore, you can appreciate it more. What I submit when it comes to vampires, werewolves, zombies, you need to establish at some point what the rules are. Do headshots kill zombies? Does silver work on werewolves and vampires? Do crucifixes work? Stakes, wooden stakes?
Just so that
like the characters, some zombie movies,
the characters need to be aware of that stuff too.
Exactly, because some zombie movies, headshots don't work. And then others they do, or you have to decapitate, destroy the brain, whatever it may be. You have to set it up because once there's rules, then then the story the plot can act within those rules. So like when somebody pulls out a crucifix, you're like, yeah, Satan, you can't fuck with this guy now. And that's what's clever in the book about something like lashing his hands to the helm with with rope and with a crucifix, because then that means that the vampire can't take him off of that. Like, that's clever. That is clever within the rules. When you don't have any rules, you get the Evil Dead, which is just Evil Dead Rise, which was just random shit. It was just random, like to the point where the woman and the kid, the young girl and the aunt are swimming in blood in the elevator, and there's all these hands grabbing them, and it was like they're just dead. Like, they're fucked. There's no way they're going to get out of this because there's no rules. There's nothing clever that they did to get out of that situation other than like the movie needed them to get out of it.
Right. Well, this is what frustrated me, I think, was like we got to, again, I think here's the problem. The problem was the writer specifically even said, he's like, I want this to be stuck within the framework of the book. So it's like, you can't kill Dracula in the story because Dracula has to go on and terrorize London. So you can't kill him in this book or in the movie. So we have to keep everything within that framework. So now you're like
sacrifice. We needed a stronger sense of sacrifice and therefore tragedy, because that sacrifice would have been for nothing. That's what I would have voted for.
So they changed it. And then this is another thing that it bothered me, is they changed the implications of how in the book. So in the book, again, we talk about that log. It's like the captain was on the ship. People start going missing. They're down to him and the first mate. Everything is kind of gone to shit. And then eventually the first mate kills himself, and then he's just like, I got to get the ship to London. I'm going to just tie myself to the mast because I got to go down with the ship, essentially. And that's how the book is. But like, I felt like the implication there is that there is no, in the movie, they start to get to a point where they know this Dracula creature's out there, that you see him. It's another big gripe, which I think we'll talk about. But like,
when you don't see him, it's pretty great. But when you do see him,
you start seeing him, you're like,
no, why'd you do that?
There's times he looks good, and there's times he doesn't look great.
Like,
but then
this shot right here, like,
it looks cool.
It looks cool. Yeah, I like it. Yeah. So
that looks cool. But anyway, but then you get to a point in the movie where they're like, oh, we have to, basically they're just saying like, oh, we have to stop the ship because if we do, Dracula's going to get to see it. We have to get rid of this monster. So it's like, oh, it's pretty clear what you need to do is you need to blow up the ship or do something. Because they even say, if you watch the movie, they even say, he says, oh, we're also carrying petroleum, which they don't say that in the book. In this movie, they say we're carrying petroleum. So they could have said, oh, we have all these boxes of petroleum. We're going to blow the ship up.
And
Yep.
then, like I'm saying logically, not within the framework of the book, they would have said that. And then at least you could, like, I think here's what I think the ending
It's
should have
frustrating.
been.
I know,
Right?
McCurdy.
The
I
ending,
feel your pain.
the
It's
ending
frustrating.
should have been what I think the ending should have been is if the somehow, okay, we get the climax or whatever, the die you devil moment, but the die you devil moment's more like Jaws, where like the ship blows up or something cool happens like that.
Yeah.
But the ship is still in pieces and they're on, they're floating off the sea, and then the ship crashes. And like we don't know what happened to Dracula, but then this dog jumps off the thing. And we earlier established in the movie that he can transform into things like Beast.
Yeah.
So because they don't really establish that either. That's the other thing that, like, I think the thing that was annoying is that it's annoying for people who read the book, I guess. That's why it's annoying. But in the book,
but even not
said
having
it's
read
a
the
man.
book, set that up, because essentially what you're talking about is let them think they won. Let them think they won. The thing that terrific.
It's
Yeah,
basically
that
the
is
thing
straight
is
out
what
of the
I'm
thing
talking
where
about.
where the whole story begins with one camp. Their monster runs off as a dog, runs into the American scientific camp, and they just think it's a dog. And the Norwegians, they die, right? The truth dies with them, so they just think it's a dog. Turns out that it's a devil in disguise. So, but what I was getting at with my quick review is that we know it's going to be a tragedy. We know that Dracula will not be killed. We just like we knew the Titanic would sink. So what you need within there is just a good story of these people that inevitably would have to be somebody sacrificing themselves to blow up the ship, or at least let them think that they've won. But meanwhile, showing to the audience, just like you said, the dog jumps off the ship. And, it's like, oh, yeah, the manifest here says there was one dog aboard. Well, we know that dog, Huck, died. So who's this new dog? Well, it's Dracula in disguise.
Yeah,
and then he goes off into an alleyway somewhere, and he morphs up into his humanoid shape. Magically, he's got his cane, and he walks off into the streets of London. And that'd be like, oh, all that work to kill him was a failure. And whether everybody died or not, it's the point being that we knew it would end in tragedy. So give them a win that ends up being like a pseudo win, right? But still give them that win of thinking that they achieved it. Or even if you didn't do the dog, I think the dog thing's clever. I think that's great. But even if you didn't do that, we know that Dracula can fly. So even if my whole point would be, give them an interesting plan, and they did try to. It's technically in there, but it's half-assed. It's like immediately abandoned. It's like, We'll get them into the cargo hold, and then we'll sink the ship. And then that plan immediately goes to shit. And then they just end up trying to shoot him as he's flying around. It's just kind of embarrassing and lame. But seeing them fulfill their plan and then have it kind of get messed up. And you keep talking about Alien, which is accurate. I kept thinking of Alien 3. AJ the noob isn't here because he's constantly in the Discord talking about how much he hates it.
We have to talk about
I
one
like
other thing
Alien
about this
3.
movie.
But real quick,
talk about one other thing about this movie.
Alien 3 specifically, what I kept thinking about there is that what you have in Alien 3, so you had Alien and then Aliens, and in Aliens they have all these weapons. They can, it's a war movie.
It's an action movie. It's the Marines versus aliens and how that.
Yeah,
that
and they're fighting a whole bunch.
That movie's an action movie. We go back to more of a horror film in the third one.
Alien 3 is switching up where we're on a prison planet, right? It's like a big prison with just like all male prison with no weapons, right? And they all realize that they're stuck with this creature, just like this movie. It's like we're stuck in a confined space with no supplies, no weapons. So what do you have to do? You got to think. You got to use this. So they basically they're like, we have a smelting plant, right? So we will somebody will be the bait, and they're gonna run through all these corridors. And they're going to trick the alien into getting into this one confined space, and then we're going to dump molten lead on it. Great, right? So you give them that plan, and I think as it goes, they actually, like, a guy runs in there, and he's, like, stuck with it, and he's like, they're like, you got to get out. We got to dump the lead. And he's like, just do it, because he's sacrificing himself. And that's like the best stories ever have to do with self-sacrifice. Like, the greatest, like the Christ story is a story of sacrificing yourself for other people. It's AKA the best story ever told, blah, blah, blah. So that moment in Alien 3 is fantastic, but then it's all for naught because the alien is so powerful that even molten lead doesn't stop it. It does briefly, it's defeated. But the whole point being that, like, set up a plan, have them fulfill it, give them a win. They think they've killed Dracula, so on and so forth. Like, just a give and take, an up and down, like we talk about with Goldfinger versus Bond. Like, they get a win. He gets a win, they get a win, they lose. You know what I'm saying? An up and down. But instead it was like, it ended up just being a lot of like sitting around talking about how life's unfair and like the universe is cold and like a bunch of nihilism as opposed to action, and there was that one brief moment of search the ship from stem to stern. We're going to find this guy and we're going to defeat him. And then it just went back to like more existential angst, like I'm going to shoot myself in the head type of stuff. But again, I kept thinking about like, this should be more, this is an alien movie that should have been more like Alien 3. We don't have the weapons to kill it, so let's use our heads. So even something like what's something clever they could have done with the coffin? Because they had the girl on board who would know things like he needs to sleep in the coffin at night. So like put the coffin in some kind of position
They don't
where
even need that.
He's going to go into it, and then you could do something clever where it's like he needs to get back to his coffin at night, and then put that in here.
Going back to the book,
nail that down.
Going back to the book,
put the petroleum next to it, whatever it may be.
Right. Going back to the book though, real quick. That we have this character in. So let me compare this Dracula and Alien real quick. So in Alien, this is the thing that this movie doesn't have. In Alien, which I'm going to compare it more to Alien. They eventually figure out what scares them, what could kill the alien. Nothing actually can kill the alien. That's why they're stuck with the plan of like, we just need to get it off the ship or blow up the ship, because they're like, I don't think we can defeat this thing. And in the thing, they realize, you learn things about the alien as the movie goes on, right? You learn, it has acid blood, so we can't use guns, we can't use knives because we're going to get burned. You learn that like, flames actually scare it away. It might actually be afraid of flames. Like we learn those kinds of things. So there's all of those like little things that you start learning. We don't really get that in this movie, which is very frustrating. But they lay out stuff where I was like, use that character to learn this thing, but they never did it, and it really pissed me off. The thing is that okay, so you've reframed the gypsy character, because I really thought like she was just kind of tacked on because they realized that they had a whole male cast and they needed to throw a female in the movie because. Side note to that part. It frustrated me because I was also thinking of Alien 3, but for different reasons. Because yes, she's the only female on board. It's a male ship. It's the late 1800s. You don't think some seamen are going to be at a little, little horny. And that's when I saw the one guy and he's like giving these really, kind of creepy looks. And I was thinking like, are we going to get a scene where he tries to sexually assault this woman and the guy has to defend her? Or are we going to see like something where he's going to try to go into her cabin at night, but then gets eaten by Dracula? Like, that would have been interesting. That would have been interesting.
If she was truly a bride of Dracula, I thought at some point it would be like, she's pretending to be this victim, but really she's still a fucking vampire, and she's going to end up she could have ended up being the reason why Dracula won in the end, because they trust her. Because in the beginning it's like, she's just a bloody stowaway. Throw her to what do you say? We let Neptune deal with stowaways, which is a cool line, but I thought the whole time I was like, she keeps talking about, and when you say she's just kind of like tacked on, I'm watching it being like, is this like a female empowerment story that's been shoved in there where it's like,
I didn't think that. I never thought that. I just felt
but that's what she's saying. What she's saying the whole time.
I felt more like it was like, and I think there's a good reason to do it anyway. It doesn't matter, because if you're going to go see a movie and it's going to be
fulfilled, it wasn't exactly fulfilled though.
Fest, I don't really want to see a sausage fest. At least have one female would be nice.
And that's fine. That's fine. But it was a lot of like, I was I served him and he fed on me and I'm free now. And it's like, okay, yeah, blah, 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 blah. Let's get back to killing Dracula. So use the knowledge you have to help us. But instead it was a lot
Back
of
to
just
what I
like,
was going to say, though.
just as much as everybody else is whining about nihilism, she was whining about being a victim. And it was like, can we get back to killing Dracula, please?
Back to killing Dracula real quick, though. So this was, again, it was a thing that frustrated me about the movie, because if you know anything about the novels, you know that faith, the cross, Jesus, all that stuff is like, those are weapons. Holy water, those are weapons against Dracula. They've always been there, right? In the books, and almost every other
why? Can I say
iteration.
why real quick?
Because he's the devil?
As I just said, because there's a strong theme of like, because somebody will look at a crucifix and be like, it's just a guy dying on a cross. No, it has meaning. And that meaning is self-sacrifice. Because we are inherently, we are animalistic, right? We are animal and divine at the same time. That's the duality of man. So our default mode is extreme selfishness. So Christianity is the dramatization of overcoming that selfishness with self-sacrifice. So it's not just a guy on a cross. It's representative of giving yourself for everybody else versus someone like Dracula, who literally feeds off of other human beings, which is the polar opposite. So it is an extremely meaningful tale. Well, Dracula's tale is extremely meaningful, and Christ's story is just as meaningful because it is in direct opposition to what Dracula stands for, which is like he feeds on fucking children. He eats babies, right? So it all has meaning, and then people today are like, "Yo, what's the meaning? I don't know. Who's Jesus again? That guy on the wall who's like this? It's lame."
I don't know anybody who talks like that, but I guess you do.
Well, you go to church,
I guess you know these people.
You know,
I do.
Anyway,
but I guess you know these people. Anyway, what I was getting at,
a lot of those people.
Hold on. What's getting apparently? I don't know. So what's getting frustrating was that, like, I don't know who you hang out with. What was frustrating was that you set up. You have this woman who's gypsy. She's from Transylvania, or in that area, so she knows enough about Dracula. Yeah. You've got a holy man, which I thought was a great character setup. I was like, oh, cool. The cook is like this devout Catholic. Yeah. It's like, okay, that's a cool idea.
Let's do something with this.
You can do something with that. And then what we do with it is such BS that I was like, are you kidding? Like, did you ever read Dracula? Do you know like how all that stuff's connected? Like how holy water and all that stuff is like, those are ways. So it's like
that guy could have been blessing water. You
had the setup. You had the setup of them. They could, exactly. They could have done something where she tells them like, you need a holy man or somebody of faith or something like those are that's what's going to kill him. Because like there's that scene where she's like, I don't know. She's like, I lived with him. Yes, Kever, it is the second best Dracula movie of this year. But
super high praise.
Wow. But no, you set it up where it's like she she could have just said, you need a man of faith, you need holy water, you need a cross, you need this, you need yada yada yada. Those are the types of things. Instead, what the movie does, which I still thought was kind of a clever line, is like, I've lived with him 100 years in my castle. He's lived in my village for hundreds of years, and do you think I know how to kill him? Like, thought that was kind of clever. I was like, okay, that's kind of funny. But at the same time, I'm like, you traded that for like this thing that you set up with a holy guy. Like, you could have just said, we need this. Oh crap, the cook. And then they gone to the cook. And then maybe something doesn't work or whatever. And then you learn like, oh, he needed truth. I don't know.
Or even down to like you mentioned the garlic. The holy man was also a cook. Like he could have figured out the whole garlic thing.
Garlic.
Like, there's elements there that you're like, why are these not brought about and represented in the movie? So instead, McCurdy. So instead, what happens? That holy man ends up being the call him coward, call him intelligent, call him whatever you want, but he ends up
he gets on the
boat. He's like, I'm getting the fuck out of here. And he takes a lifeboat and he starts rowing away, and all he brings with him is his Bible instead of any food, I guess. And he's rowing, and I think that scene was only meant to set up one idea. Do you know what that idea is?
That the cross doesn't work?
That and also that Dracula has wings, because he thinks he's getting away, and suddenly Dracula flies and lands on on that boat. and kills him. And it's like, okay, it's like these things are happening, and you're like, there's nothing thematically holding anything together other than this vague idea of the universe is indifferent and cold, and you can't make sense of it, and bad things happen, and children die, and priests die, and everybody dies, and it's unfair. Blah, blah, blah. It was like, this has no thematic cohesion. It's just so forgettable. It sucks that it's this forgettable. It's unfortunate.
It was like, I was looking forward to this movie too.
Me too.
I was looking forward to this one. I was like, oh, this is like a story that I was like, oh, I actually want to see this.
And again, if at the end the Bride of Dracula, like, had she been the Bride of Dracula, or because it's only after all's said and done that they're floating in the water, and she suddenly, her eyes are all glassed over, and he's like, oh, babe, but babe, you're
like, if you get enough actual blood,
know.
like, if you get enough undead blood, then you revert back. Like, that was like, that to me was weird. I was like, that's weird.
I wish they would have left the blood transfusions out of it entirely. Like, it just
I didn't like that
confused
part. I was like,
things.
The only reason they put it in there, is because they wanted to set up that he was a doctor, or like to show that he knew this knowledge, and so like they put that in there for that. So it's like, when you're reading, when you're like watching the beginning of the movie, you're like, okay, I kind of see where this is going. Kind of like it's like, he's a doctor, so he's going to be able to use science, and then we go back to that theme of like science versus the unknown, and like, because at the end of the day, like, the two people that survive are the man of science, and then the person of the unknown, or of faith or belief, and maybe not even that, but like, you know what I'm saying, like, the unknown, I guess that's what I'll say, the unknown, and a man of like facts and reason, and somebody of magic and mysticism. But like, that's not really what it was. So there's just a lot of things. There's a lot of stuff left on the table. There's no
thematic clarity.
I want to change all of this stuff.
There's no thematic clarity. There's a lot of missed opportunities. It's frustrating, and then it all leads up to, die, you devil, and like it's like, I refuse to be the servant of this guy anymore, and like, just stuff that was like if the whole story was that's a good theme. Like, that really is a good theme, that she's like, my people have been enslaved by this guy forever, and this is my one chance to correct it. And it's like, but like, in the end, instead of fucking stabbing him or something, she just, die, you devil, and then the mast hits him, and he's like, but then he's just like,
is he a chicken now? Did he turn into a chicken?
It's just, like, it was like, he might as well have. It was just, he was like, whatever, bitch, and he just pushed it off. He didn't care.
I mean, even if, okay, here's another take, right? Was been like, what if instead, they shot him, like, they shot the thing, and they thought like they shot him, and then he fell into the water or something, or like they shot him and he fell into a part of the boat, or
give them a victory, like, make them think they've won, but then we as an audience
don't have them be stuck against a mast and then they just float off. Like, that was kind of
it's literally, he gets stuck against a mast, they jump off, and then he just pushes the mast off, and then, like, I don't even know what happened to him. He like flew off or something, and then I guess later he came back to get his boxes of dirt or something. Like,
okay. Well, actually, where's my glasses? So I can be in there for 2 seconds. Well, actually, what happens in the book, Charlie, is that all of the boxes actually were supposed to be shipped to a lawyer in London, and they do end up at that lawyer. And I don't know if in the book it's presumed that the lawyer's actually Dracula in disguise, or if it's actually somebody he paid ahead of time. It's like, oh, you need to take these boxes, and you need to take them to all these locations and put them there. And then he's like, okay, you got it. But of course, we don't know any of that. But anyway, no. Let's just go back to the list real quick. Let me talk about the list.
Okay, bringing up the list.
Let's
for you, buddy. Where's the list?
Where's it?
Where's the damn list?
Where's that fucking list? So we have figured out it's below Renfield.
Yeah, Renfield is the better. Like, we do this sometimes. It's like, go right to the obvious. You might as well compare it to the previous
Dracula movie,
because what at least I talk about a lot is like the essence of a franchise, right? And so if there were multiple Ant-Man movies on this, like, the Ant-Man 1 would be higher than Quantumania because it just nailed the essence of what an Ant-Man movie is. Versus this right out the gate, you're like, you might as well put it below Renfield because Renfield is a Dracula movie that actually has a theme about like codependent relationships. And even though it kind of devolves into like goofy action movie stuff, which doesn't necessarily make it bad. It just kind of maybe watered it down a little bit. This ended up just being so meh by the end that it's just like clear cut below Renfield. That wasn't necessarily meh as much as it was just like a goofy, fun.
If you went and saw this
Dracula
movie, you're not going to have the worst time. You're just going to be like, okay.
Exactly. You walk out
Okay.
like this movie doesn't get my recommendation by far because it's like
it's definitely a movie you should watch on Netflix. Like to me, this was like,
yeah. If you're a Dracula fan, watch it on Netflix. If you're not a Dracula fan, pass it.
It stuck the August movie landing, right? Like this was a solid August movie because you could see the framework of it being a dump month movie. So SB had just suggested that we put this below Knock at the Cabin. I think it's slightly better than Knock at the Cabin.
Yeah,
but I think it's in the realm because I think
it's got a similar theme. People in a confined space in a desperate situation. So it's like
I think it's
on
better.
theme.
I think Pope's overall is still a better movie. I don't even remember why I completely really didn't like that movie. I think generally I thought it was just so.
You kept saying it's like kind of. You kept saying like I've seen this movie before and it's been done better. And then my counter argument was like, yeah, but we're not ranking The Exorcist on here. You know, The Exorcist might be
going back
towards
to
the
this
top,
one,
you know.
I've seen Dracula movies before. I've seen better versions of this.
Yeah.
But I do think Pope's Exorcist at least has a clear, like, at least they set up James Bond Pope. Okay, like that was like, at least silly enough that I was like, review, it just set something weird up.
Russell Crowe is that movie. Like Russell Crowe's character, and like he
had that.
He's why I'm hoping
as that.
He's why I'm hoping that there's a Pope's Exorcist cinematic universe. Is just to watch fat Russell Crowe shoot around on a Vespa.
Vespa, yeah, shoots around the Vespa. So I say Pope's Exorcist is still better than this movie.
Okay,
when we get to Magic Mike, and I think Magic Mike. I still think it's better. I think Magic Mike
kind of hits better. Like like this movie, you really walk out of it just kind of like, okay, this is one of those movies where you walk out going, that was a movie, I guess, you know.
Yeah, Magic Mike's problem is like you said is like it set aside your qualms of like it's not as funny as the first two, and it doesn't really, and it's trying to be a serious movie. Like I get that.
It's trying to be an art film.
At the other hand, it's like it's still like one of the better filmmakers of this century. What am I saying? Of this decade, whatever.
Yeah,
making a movie that's still like essentially, when it boils down to it, it's a concert movie. You're there to just see the dancing, and that's really what the movie's there for. But at least they try to put an interesting story behind it. So I'm like, and I think the execution of that movie excels, and at least it does stuff that's kind of interesting and fun. And I'm like, okay, I'm here for this movie. Yeah. Transformer: Rise of the Beast. That's where I'm getting into territory. I'm like, I'm getting closer because, but at least Transformers: Rise of the Beast was entertaining. I think the thing that I really just didn't like about it was the third act. Like when it just is like a full blown shoot 'em up, and you just don't really care at that point. But at least they like,
which is what this was
the
too.
Characters.
This was the same.
I like
thing
the characters.
You know?
I like the setup. I think Transformers at least has a little more panache and is a little more. It's just better executed. You know, it has the money to put behind it. So I think, but I'm thinking about Knock at the Cabin and then this movie, and I'm like, okay, now we're in a realm. Like that's where you can like sway me. It's like somewhere between. I think it's above Plane.
You could maybe say that. Like I think in terms of execution, it's above Plane. That's a good bottom to have as Plane, because Plane is, as usual, Plane is Plane. Plane's just like generic.
This movie's close.
It's almost in that realm where where it's like generic, action adventure, generic action adventure that doesn't leave you with like a, oh God, I wish there was a sequel. Like even with this, like real quick, let's talk about the ending. The ending the ending made me think, was this supposed to be part of the Dark Universe at some point? Which we haven't talked about the Dark Universe, but the Dark
Oh
Universe.
yeah, and we haven't really talked
wanted
about
to
any of that
do.
really.
Universal made an attempt, and I'm on record saying I wish they would have continued it, where it was like, let's do this thing called the Dark Universe. It's going to be the MCU, but with all the monsters. And they made the Mummy with Tom Cruise, and it would essentially be like all these interconnected Universal monster movies. And I was like fully on board. And now that they've canceled it, I kind of wish that they would have just done it. Like, it's like, okay, how about this real quick? Let's go away real quick.
Let's talk
Like
about it.
some
Let's talk about the
executive,
Dark Universe.
some executive being like, hey, let's keep doing the Dark Universe, but we don't need to label it. And then the marketing team's like, what do you mean? We need to make a big deal about it. No. Let's just keep making monster movies, but like subtly have them connected. And maybe over time it'll grow. And you could do this movie, and you could have it just be the next movie could include the character of Clemens, because this movie ends with Clemens being the sole survivor, and he floats into London, and he just starts going to pubs, because I guess he's going to be like Van Helsing, and he's going to start stalking Dracula, and Dracula just kind of taunts him, and then just kind of disappears, and it's like watching the ending, I was just like, is this setting up a sequel? Is this
Well, that's where I was like, I felt like the movie just shoots itself in the foot. I felt like my review was basically, this movie shoots itself in the foot at every chance that it can get, from the beginning to telling the audience that, by the way, this is based off Dracula. Don't like if you were confused by the title, it's based off Dracula. And I'm like,
Dracula.
It's Dracula. This is Dracula adaptation.
Yeah.
To the beginning of the movie, it's like, oh, what happens to the ship? Oh, the ship hits the shore. Okay, well then what happens on the ship? And then it's just like, it goes downhill from there. And then even by the end of the movie, I'm like, I could care less. I was just like, all right, cool. They're not going to make a sequel to this, so I don't understand.
Can you clarify something for me though? Can you clarify something for me? So you said early on that that's what turned you off, was the hey, we're gonna directly reference the Dracula, and that you said that kind of turned you off right away. The thing that got me, that kind of worried me right away, was that the movie kind of started out somewhat classy just with how it was handling it, but then before it cut to the title, Last Voyage of the Demeter, it showed like a couple shots. It was like the helm, and then like a mast, and then it went to and I can't remember if that was during the storm after it had crashed, or if it was still in port. But what it did was, it was like helm, mast, or whatever. And then I swear they did, the typical horror movie thing where something shoots at the camera, and it like blacks out the camera.
Yeah.
Like it's typically a face, and it's like, and it like blacks out the camera.
Right.
I swear they did that just before the title. And I was like, no, like the moment that happened, that to me screams cheap horror movie. The moment that happens.
Yeah.
Right. Instead of classy horror movie, it's cheap horror movie. And I was like,
yeah, I don't like when but back to
Huevos. I
I
wish it was Master and Commander, but horror.
But
I wish that. There was a moment where I thought of Master and Commander, but Master and Commander is too classy to ever be.
I just felt like, as this movie kept going on, I was like, yeah, okay, wait. Something I want to talk about, we didn't even mention, but I think we're close on the ranking.
Yeah.
There are a lot of references to Alien as you're watching the movie, because the scene where he finds the girl, I was like, he's in this cargo hold. The cargo hold reminded me of the scene where Harry Dean Stanton gets killed by the alien, because he's like it's very dark. He's looking around. And I was like, oh, this would have been even better if they just had little drips of water coming off the top of the cargo hold. That would have been great. But when you watch that scene, you're like, this feels like Alien. There's another scene where they're sitting around the table and they're all talking. This is the first time we all get to see all the crewmen together. And I was like, this is straight out of Alien. Like, even down to what they're talking about.
Good scene.
Because they're all talking about like, oh, you get a share. Like, you get to find out like what these characters are about and like who they are. And like,
you know, he's like, oh yeah, you get your share. And like, that was something they talk about in Alien, is about how they're arguing over their shares, because a couple of them are like, well, why do we have to go to this stupid space rock to go pick this thing up? Or like, are we going to get extra money for doing this? And like, that was the thing they argued about in that movie. So I was like, okay, there's definitely a tie there from that. There was another one that I think the Alien 3 thing I was thinking about, like that could have been something they did, but they never did. But yeah. And then even like when they're walking around the ship, there's moments where I felt like the ship felt like it was designed in a similar fashion to the Nostromo's, as far as how it's very enclosed and cramped when they're down in the hull and stuff like that. So that stuff I thought was cool.
But again, they set up like there were things like as far as Alien goes, there were those moments of like I did really enjoy the scene where Germanic guy was tied to the mast, and he's like, my senses are stimulated. Like I can feel everything. Like I can hear everything. I can hear the blood pumping in your veins. So we know at that point, we've known for a bit that he's zombified. He's basically a vampire,
right? Because
he'd been trying to attack the kid. But like that maybe would have been something to that, like that the purpose, the rules that set forth may have been better set forth by our Bride of Dracula. You know, had they just found this crazy stowaway and they ended up having to tie her to the mast and she ends up bursting into flames, like that would be the type of thing that would be like, what the fuck is going on? But we get that later in the movie, and then they just kept keeping her alive to have this like heroine tale of like, he's oppressed my people forever and now I'm going to kill him. Like this screamed of like written by 17 different people. I don't know how many people touched it in the end.
There's two writers on this movie, but I don't know if those two writers were like the best. So I don't know.
And this is where again I go back.
It feels like it was just rewritten or cut down.
Yeah, where Haunted Mansion was a piss poor plot with you could see the story. The story was about a guy getting over his dead wife. This was a decent plot with a piss poor story, where by the end of it, you're just like, what was I supposed to get out of this exactly? It's a little too confused. It's all over the place thematically. It's the Dayu Devil's the dumbest fucking thing ever. Just blah, 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 blah.
Oh, I was going to tell you one thing about the devil thing, though. Well, it's only interesting because I just read about it, was that like, so the name like there's a couple things. So the name Dracula has its origin is in Romania. Well, Dracula sounds a lot like dragon, but like it's funny to me that we've associated Dracula with bats when really we should probably have always associated with dragons, but they're kind of like same kind of mythical type thing. But apparently Bram Stoker picked the name Dracula. That was a name he found because he thought that name meant devil in Romanian. It doesn't, but that's what he thought it meant. And so then he used that for his, and it makes sense. I mean, you see all the horrific things he does, and you know,
well, he's constantly referred to as Satan, and as I pointed out,
monster, right?
Satan, Christ sacrifices himself for others. Satan sacrifices others for himself. And it's as simple as that. When it comes to religion, people get all caught up. They get bent out of shape about like, does God or the devil exist objectively? And my whole philosophy is like, who the fuck knows, and nobody can prove it. But spiritually, those forces do exist. The devil exists inside of you as a spirit, as selfishness, and the Lord exists in you as selflessness. So what are you going to choose day to day? Are you going to follow that devil on your shoulder or Jesus on your shoulder? And so that's where stories like this, like ignoring that and just being like, whatever, crucifixes don't exist or whatever, or aren't effective
they don't work, guys.
That's its own can of worms. But something I thought was kind of interesting was way back in January, I said about Megan, one of my pet peeves with Megan was that early on I thought that, remember when Megan, the first kill is Megan kills the neighbor's dog? And that's the first
I was seriously thinking about your whole gripe with that as I was watching this movie, because I knew going into this there's going to be a slasher element to it, and you're going to see a first kill and a second kill, and they got to ramp up.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that because I do think this one we don't we don't exactly see.
You see
him
what you see is the
pull.
dog. You see the dog kind of like inching forward,
Yeah.
and then you just see a shadow go, and then the dog, and then later they find Huck and all the other animals killed.
Yeah.
That was exactly what I said Megan should have been, because Megan instead did that thing where, remember the dog is like inching towards the hole in the fence, and Megan just like suddenly jumps in front of the hole. And remember, my whole take on that was they should have done something like this, where maybe you see a shadow, you get the impression of seeing the dog killed, but you don't know for sure who did it. And the whole point being that in following the story, we as the audience know already that it's Megan, but you need to at least kind of shade it a little bit so that there's a slow escalation of death, where the first one, it's like, maybe there's some kind like there's a little plausible deniability there. Like, maybe it's Megan, but like maybe it isn't Megan, right? And so it slowly builds until it is revealed that it is Megan. But when they do that quickly, it was just like, oh, okay, you don't really
I thought
know
about it.
I
Seriously thought about it as I was watching the movie. I'm like, oh, Charlie's gonna bring this up when we do the podcast, or like it made me at least think about it.
They did it right.
Like, oh yeah, that's right.
They did it right here. They did what Megan should have done.
Here, bring up that list again. Bring up the list.
I'm bringing it up. I'm right.
There's just two movies that I don't know where. So between Knock at the Cabin and Insidious: The Red Door, that's where I'm like.
I would say Knock at the Cabin at least has, even though it's based on a book, at least has some kind of like originality to it that maybe gives it like, because again, they're both my favorite genre. Like The Thing is my all-time favorite horror movie, is The Thing, which is this movie, which is Knock at the Cabin, which is Alien, which is a horror movie of people in a desperate situation, and they can't just go home, right? Like
there's no way out.
Thing,
you're isolated.
You're isolated. And Alien, isolated. Knock at the Cabin, isolated. I mean, yeah, somebody could have like gotten in a car and driven off, but they were being kept at this cabin. So those are my favorites. What the thing I said about Knock at the Cabin, though, was that they didn't really explore the space. There were all these like spatial elements that they could have utilized, whereas with something like The Thing, they do. Like, you explore the entire compound and they start making use of the entire compound. This had those elements there, like the cargo hold and
like, you knew where the cargo hold was, the galley, the captain's quarters, like that was the one thing I thought was okay. Hold on, we're gonna do this a bunch, but going back real quick, there's the moment where he locks him in the cabin's what do they call it? The captain's galley. No, it's not the captain's. What is it called where he lives?
The quarters?
His quarters. Yeah, the captain's quarters. Is that what it's called? Yeah. The quarters. He locks him into the quarters and he's like, don't get out. And then what does the kid do? He gets out. And I was like, and he gets out to another part of the ship. So like geography wise, I was a little confused. I'm like, wait, where's the other door? Is it like, because and I will say that one thing that I thought was interesting about this was that this movie takes place with the type of ship it is. It's a time and place that I don't feel like gets a lot of attention as far as movie going goes. I think in recent years, people before History Channel kind of went off the deep end. I think there was a lot of criticism towards the History Channel because it spent so much time only focusing on World War II. And like they're like, well, like they were only focusing on World War II, but then it's like there's a gambit of history that you could also explore of other time periods and different things.
Of course, yeah.
And I always felt like it was very odd that we never really like that late 1800 period time of like basically the turn of the century. It's like we are looking a window at like what that kind of was like. So like things like lamps and flashlights do exist. And they do even mention that like this is an older ship, like this ship isn't a steamship like a lot of the other modern ships, it's still a sailing vessel. And like I thought that was kind of an interesting little thing. Wave's like, they needed more ships.
We need more ship movies. No, we need more ship movies, you're saying. Yeah.
But no, like it's just like it's an interesting period of time. And I felt like what this movie needed was a better director, unfortunately. And I felt like if this movie was directed by Robert Eggers, like think about that. Think about a Robert Eggers version of this film. I think.
Who is Robert Eggers?
He did The Witch. He did The Lighthouse.
Yeah. Yeah.
he really nails the historic accuracy
Yeah.
of those time periods, but he's also a really great storyteller, and he could really like hold back instead, because the other thing this movie does is just like, let's show the creature. And even the first time you see Dracula, he looks awful. I was like, that's
Yeah,
I
I
had to
mean,
take a
anytime
double
you're
take. I
doing
was
like,
it
there were
looks pretty
times
bad.
where his close-ups they looked practical,
They were
and then there were
awful.
times where they looked CGI, and I was like, no, it was bad. And I did kind of expect at some point that, like, okay, Huevos just brought up Nosferatu. I was expecting him to at
Yes.
some point maybe kind of he would consume enough blood to look like a man. Like suddenly he would have like a full form. But the whole time, even when he was in London in a pub, he still looks like this bat creature, you know? He just looks like Smeagol
Yeah.
on crack, you
So
know?
Huevos is talking about Nosferatu. So I don't know, people who are never going to watch this or are going to watch this. Nosferatu was actually the first. It's not the first. It's the second version of Dracula on screen. However,
What was the first?
I have to go look it up, but apparently it's a lost film. Like
Oh.
no one knows where it's at. Like it got
Okay.
probably burned or whatever. They can't
Yeah.
find it. It's an old film. This is like turn of the
Somebody
century.
left it in the sunlight.
Right, probably. But this film, Nosferatu, was like a German film.
Yeah.
It was a German film, but they didn't have, again, this is only like 30 years, 20 years from the time the book was written. So it's like, it's not that long ago when the movie was made. So they didn't have the rights to do the book. So they had to change all the names of all the characters. So they changed. Dracula is no longer Dracula. Dracula is Count Orlok. But they did have a definitely different look and feel for how Dracula was going to look, and he looked very. He had these long ears and a big nose, and I think one of my slides I even put it in the picture.
You did,
was
yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it was on the Demeter. So it's like he has a really creepy look, and this is like the silent film era. And it's been, they even lampoon it now in What We Do in the Shadows as like he's like the master vampire, and he's like the oldest of them all. But when you talk about again going back to the books, with like the specifically the Bram Stoker's Dracula, Francis Ford Coppola film, closest interpretation, because you do see him like going from he's an old man. And then when he starts sucking people's blood, then he like shapeshifts and he turns into like this young, beautiful gentleman that like women like are attracted to. And like you kind of see that progression. So I do see what you're talking about. I do felt like maybe they were just thinking like, oh, well, he doesn't need to change it on man. I did think that after going back and reading what the passage was, I was like, wouldn't that have been more interesting? Because then you could play it into the Thing, right? Instead of just being Alien, now it's the Thing.
Exactly.
They could have played it into it. Where it's like, instead of getting this girl stowaway, like, okay, say that there's an actual girl shipmate instead, or maybe she's a gypsy that ends up on board or something. You make her a stowaway, whatever. But what if there's a man that keeps showing up? There's a man that magically showed up on the ship. They don't know who he is, and he's like this old decrepit man, and like they're showing pity on him. They're like, you shouldn't, what? Like, instead of it being a girl, they're like, we're not going to throw this old man. He's like, he's sick. Like, we need to help him. And then it turns out that old man is actually Dracula the whole time, and he's like slowly killing all of the people. Like, that could have been interesting.
And then because the movie had certain elements of they injected some sexism and racism in there, where it was like, it's got to be the chick because women bring bad luck to a crew, or it's got to be this black doctor, Dr. Dre, because he's a animal, he's a savage, right? So that was like, and I'm not. This movie didn't ring of like modern day like obnoxious.
It did for almost 2 seconds, and then I was like, okay, never mind, I get it.
Yeah, it was
does for like
fine. It was
okay.
2
seconds there when he's revealing
there was a whole scene where he was like, nobody's ever taken me seriously because I'm black, and that's why I ended up in Romania. Because like it wasn't until I got there that they realized I was black, and then they didn't give me the job.
When he starts going to the story, I was like,
where's this going, fella? Where's this going?
That's what it was. It was like it felt like that, and then I was like, oh, wait, why are we bringing it? And then finally, when it dawns on me, like what he's explaining, I was like, okay, like I thought that worked
Yeah.
really well. Like I thought that was handled
Sure.
very well. So I was like,
Yeah.
I never like it never broke me for the movie at all. Like
Yeah.
I was never a
But-
moment where I was
but-
like I felt like that.
Yeah, my point being that there those elements were in there and they were fine. But what you're talking about is, harkens back to what I was saying back in my opener, which is that I believe the thing that's missing is a certain amount of cleverness within the confines of the premise, which is a bunch of people on a ship with a Dracula monster. And what you're saying is like, then somebody finds this guy old man in a box and they're like, he's sick. And it's like, he's a stowaway, throw him over the side. And it's like, no, we got to bring him back. And he comes back and we know he's Dracula and nobody else knows. And that's what I was saying, even about the woman, where like she could have, if she would have ended up being bad in the end, that would have been great. But instead it had to be like this story about like, he's plagued my people for generations and I'm going to kill him. And it was like, okay, but like, that doesn't resonate that's not as clever. That is borderline. And I agree with you. It never went into obnoxious current social politics or whatever. But it could have if they'd pushed it another degree instead of servicing this story. Like, don't do your female empowerment thing unless you're going to make the whole story about that, when you should be servicing this premise. And the premise is a bunch of people on a boat, just like Alien, a bunch of people on a ship in space, and there's this weird monster and they don't understand it and they have to all try to work together to defeat it, but it's picking them off one by one. And what you're talking about is introducing elements from The Thing, which are trust elements, where it's like, how do we know we can trust this old guy we pulled out of a box? Or even, how do we know we can trust this woman we pulled out of a box? And a better story would have been that she isn't trustworthy. It would have been better if she was a femme fatale and that she, in the end, was working with Dracula and all that, like, I'm his slave and I'm going to overcome my position. Ended up really just servicing the plot this much. Big old fucking goose egg. As opposed to her betraying everybody in the end would have been a better story. It would have been much better. But instead, we got this like forgettable slop where at the end she's like, okay, we did it. Now I'm going to float into the sunset and set on fire. I saved my people. It's like, no, you didn't do anything. Dracula still got off the ship and now he's going to go eat a bunch of people in London. But instead in the meantime, we had to listen to you complain about like how awful it was growing up beneath his mountain and all that stuff. Like, I would have rather her have just been like this awesome, like grade A liar. Like, she's the whole time she was playing, because as you pointed out, she's a one woman on a ship of a bunch of men. She could have easily been playing all these guys the whole time. She could have been like fucking different guys on the ship, just like a bride of Dracula would do. She'd be fucking them and then she'd be sucking their blood. That would have been interesting. That would have been entertaining. That would have been servicing this plot, and that would have been clever. But instead, it was like, my people and my blah, 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 blah. It's just whiny. Everybody just sat around whining about a cold universe, and she sat around whining about her people being oppressed by Dracula, and none of that led anywhere, and none of that opened any fucking doors in my mind. It just led me to being like, I don't care about this movie. And this movie is... Is it above or below Knock at the Cabin?
Because now we're talking about it the more, I'm like, I came in here thinking like, maybe it's above Knock at the Cabin. It's above Knock at the Cabin, right? It's above Knock at the Cabin, right? And then I'm like,
I
no,
wouldn't
it's
mind. I wouldn't mind that, but like,
I think Knock
so
Knock at the Cabin's a better movie. I think Knock at the Cabin's is a better movie. And I kind of want to also say Insidious the Red Door is at least more inventive than this movie at times, even though it's like been a overused and like not as well executed sequel into a franchise of 5 films. I was like,
Insidious is a retread of itself, of like the first and second movie,
right?
And so that's why it's really low.
Well, there's a part of
Knock
me
at
that's
the Cabin, like, okay, remember the end of Knock at the Cabin when Dave Bautista is like he literally just cuts his own throat to he's like, this is how serious I am about you guys killing each other, and then he cuts his throat. Like,
yeah.
That, as much as I talk so much shit about that movie, but I was like, that ending. But that ending is at least effective so far as we've tried to convince you this whole time. But look in my eyes, and I'm going to like watch. he's like, "This is how serious I am," and he just cuts his throat. Like, that's how you nail. Even though the movie kind of is weak up until then, it at least nails that final bit. Whereas this movie absolutely drops the ball by the third act and is just like forgettable.
Again, like I said, it drops the ball. Like, it doesn't have mystery, which is something that drove me nuts throughout the whole film. Like, the thing about Knock the Cabin, I just talked to Kevra last night. He didn't like Knock at the Cabin, but he at least was captivated by trying to find out that he was like, well, wait, did it's like, was it real? Is it not real? Is it real? Is it not real? And the movie does a really great job of putting you at the edge of the seat and making you think, well, like, he even brings up all this stuff. It's like, no, this is a bunch of people who all think the same thing because of some news bullshit. Like, you are out of your mind. And the other dude's like, dude, but what if it is real? And so the whole time you're like, okay, is it real? Is it not real? Are they telling the truth? Is this made up? Like, you're kind of on the edge of your seat just because of that. And that at least drives the story a little bit forward. Yeah. This movie, it's like, you already know by the beginning of the movie, the ship is going to
Yeah, this is Dracula. This is from Dracula. Hey, it's from Dracula. Dracula's story.
It's Dracula. Hey, Dracula's story. Just so you, if you were confused by the title, guy, it just felt
Dracula
like
TM. Dracula TM.
Hey guys, I just want to let you all know that the story that you're about to watch, this is actually about Dracula. If you never read the book Dracula, that's okay. But like, it's a chapter 7. Let me just make sure you know, it's chapter 7 in Dracula. So if you go home tonight after you see the movie, just pull out, go to Amazon, go on Amazon, go to your Kindle app, and you can buy the. I think the book's free because it's in the public domain. But you can buy the book, and then you can read chapter 7, and then you'll know why we did what we did in this movie.
It's only 5 pages. It's only 5 pages. It'll take you 10 minutes.
so just want you to know before you see our movie that this is based off Dracula. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.
You know those like how Tom Cruise always does that little thing at the beginning of his movies where he's like, "Thank you for coming to see this in theaters." That's what we needed. No, that's what we needed was you.
That did that this year.
No, but McCurdy, we needed you at the opening of this movie being like, "Hey y'all, just so you know, thanks for coming to the theater in person, but this is Dracula. This be a Dracula movie. It's about 5 pages. I'm going to read it to you right now. Hang on. I'm going to read it to you right now. So anyway, the log of the Demeter. The audience. That'd be perfect.
Actually, what's funny is, real quick, if you mentioned that though, my friend Gabe, that we went to the movie yesterday, and he was like, he turned to me and he's like, dude, that's what they've been doing. Because I think I mentioned that to him, and he's like, Paramount's the one who's doing that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's been all three Paramount movies that have come out. Paramount's been pushing that.
So Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible.
Scream. Scream did it.
Scream did it, and Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's all Paramount films, and they just put that in the front. That was kind of like their agenda this year. It's like, we want people to go to the movies. We want to thank people for coming to the movies. Those things, like when Tom Cruise did it, it doesn't bother me because it just felt like a very Tom Cruise thing to do. Is just like thank you guys. He loves movies so much.
Yeah.
But when you saw it in Dungeons and Dragons, it was like, it felt like Hugh Grant was getting paid, and he really
felt like obligatory. Like everybody's like, we have to be here.
Go back. If you go to the theaters and it's still in theaters someplace, go back, rewatch that. He's sitting there just like, oh God, I don't want to say anything. I guess I have to read these lines.
Home. I want to go home.
I want to go home. I don't want to be here. So that aside, okay. So back to the list. Okay, Insidious or this movie though? That's where I'm like, maybe I'd like to see a little bit.
Are we still agreed that Plane is the
bottom? Yes,
is the bottom.
I do think. I think here's where my head is at. Here's where my head's at.
Okay.
This movie is, I think, as equally as Plane is. I think Plane nails down. Like, let me throw this out there for you, right? The essence of an August release is a movie that has the potential to be this great movie that is a dud, and it just never it's just kind of like it's like this. It's the girl that's not I'm not gonna go there. It's like
January and August are inherently linked.
they're dump months, right? So
Yeah.
like that's why I'm saying like this movie was like it had this
Intrinsically
potential.
linked.
Like, the other thing is like I remember both of the trailers for these movies, and I remember the trailer for Plane definitely grabbed me where I was like, oh, I kind of want to see that. That looks interesting. And this movie did the same thing. I was like, I saw the trailer for this. I'm like, I was a fan of Dracula, so I already knew what it was, and I was like, oh, I definitely want to see
The
this. This looks
Untold
cool.
Chapter of Dracula. Oh my god! But as I said,
But it's
like
alien. I mean,
like,
it's alien.
It better
It's
do some
alien in like
shit
the
to
1800s.
not just be scraping the bottom of the Dracula lore barrel, and in the
But-
end, that's unfortunately what
but-
it ended up being.
But yeah, it's like these are movies that like they had the potential to be good, and they end up
Yeah.
in August because the studios look at the films because they test screen them and they have people who
Yeah.
watch the movies and they give their honest critiques. They're probably people like us that are like, this
They're like-
movie's not that good, or this movie's that, you know. And they
Just-
saw
it
this
just
movie and they were like,
doesn't resonate emotionally enough that
they're like,
like Beau Is Afraid.
Just
I
you-
walk at like I contrast it with something like walking out of Infinity Pool, and my head is spinning. Beau Is Afraid, my head is spinning. Oppenheimer, I'm just like, dude, like Nolan,
just
you're
watch?
back,
This was
you're
the best
back,
movie.
you know. But a movie like this, I walk out and I'm just like, yeah, that
well,
that was a movie. It was.
and somebody even said to
was
me
a-
that I think
why didn't it
someone's always
hit?
asked the question is like, well, why don't they put if they know the movie's not going to do what, like, it's a weird idea, but it's like you're going to put more money behind the movies you know are going to do really well, and you're going to put less money behind the movies that are going to do that you watch and you're like, this movie's not going to do well. People are not going to respond well to this, so you're going to put less money behind it. So then it's like, okay, we're going to put less money behind the marketing. Also, we're going to put it in a crappy month when people are going back to school. People are less likely to go out to the theater because they've got to start their new job. They got to start the school. They go back to college. There's too much else going on that they're not going to be like, let's go to the movie theater. So like things change, you know, and then sports season starts up and people are going to, you know, they're less likely to go to theater for those types of reasons. So like you put the movie in August. So it's like this is the essence of an August release. This just feels like an August movie. Plane feels like a January movie, like a true January movie.
Yeah.
That's why I'm like, maybe this is right above Plane.
Knock at the
Because
Cabin
I feel like Insidious
was
at least
February. It just missed January, but I would easily put it below Knock at the Cabin. I think right now I'm just above or below Insidious, The Red Door.
Okay.
I'm
thinking it's below
and at that
Insidious.
point, okay, like at that point, I'm like, I don't give a shit. Like they're both forgettable.
They're both like in that same realm.
Like they're both like save your money movies. Like
wait, is Huevo
don't
still
bother.
on here?
I have no
Who's
idea.
on here? No one's on here.
Who's watching?
I'm like,
we
who's
have
watching? Four people are watching.
people hanging out with us.
Anybody who's
So-
seen the movie, where would you put it? Above or below? Above or below Insidious, The Red Door?
Yeah, right. Like at this point, who gives a shit? Flip a fucking coin, you know. But
it's
I think, I think I
feel like
left
it
the
feels-
theater. I think I left this. Here's the difference. The difference is this: I
Okay.
leave this movie, and it's like Justice League. I walk out feeling nothing. I walked out of the Red Door being like, "Fuck this movie." So, but I honestly don't know what's worse: a movie that actually made me actively hate it, or a movie that made me feel nothing.
I felt the opposite. I felt the opposite with this movie. I felt like this movie was like, I
Like,
hated it,
you,
but
you felt
for fan
you
reasons,
felt feelings.
for fan nitpicky reasons, I didn't like the
Yeah.
movie, but I didn't absolutely hate it. I thought it was decent. I felt like if you watch this on Netflix, if this was a straight to streaming movie, I feel like no one would no one would be mad. No one would be
Okay,
like,
yeah,
oh
okay.
yeah.
Okay, how about this?
You know.
How about this? Insidious was just another retread that like that had the same themes of the first and second movie and was just trying to recapitalize on those. And it was just unnecessary. It just didn't need to be told. Whereas this story, I do believe, should have been told. This is a decent story. It should have been told better, but it's still something where that the whole premise is like, let's tell the chapter of the book where Dracula sails to London. That's great. And then everybody's dying one by one. That sounds like a movie in and of itself. That's great. And then it's told kind of piss poorly. But Insidious, though, is I would say what it comes down to is as I said in my intro, the genuine moments of horror. And I think the first time we see Dracula suck that guy off,
Don't say it that way.
it was
it that way.
like it was
Stop
genuinely
saying that.
it was genuinely horrific. And then when he sucked the kid off, it was genuinely horrific. And
what's that dude from Sound of Freedom? We need that Sound of Freedom dude in here.
Yeah,
We need that Sound of Freedom guy in
Tim
here.
Ballard.
We need Tim Ballard to come and turn this podcast. Doesn't matter who you are. This podcast is demonetized.
But those
God
moments,
damn it! I'm gonna have to turn my phone off now, Charlie, because they're gonna be listening,
yeah.
and I'm gonna get weird ads at night.
those moments, though, I think elevated above Insidious, which like Insidious's horror elements were just so. I don't want to say boring. I don't like to use boring as an adjective.
You've seen it
for something like
before.
this. But you've seen it before in other Insidious movies, and it was done better. And this was just like
Okay.
a story that didn't need to be told. It just did not need to be told. Whereas this story needed to be told, but should have been told better, and had genuine moments of good.
I really don't want to
horror.
fight you that much on it because I'm like, fine. Whatever.
Do you have any counter argument to Insidious
I
the Red
think-
Door beating the last voyage of the Demeter?
I'm
more than open to it.
Well, okay. You got to remember though, I had never seen Insidious, but when I went and saw Insidious the Red Door, so when I went to, so back to your argument of
You're a
like, if this
first-timer.
was the first time seeing a movie,
Yeah.
I enjoyed Insidious the Red Door a lot more than I did this movie, because this movie, even though
Why though? Why?
I think, okay, there is a little bit of a little caveat where it's like, okay, I've read the book, so I kind of already knew. We've been talking about it all night.
You're
Like,
kind
there's
of
a
more
lot of
pissed off.
I'm more pissed off because it's like there's a lot of little book things that it's like I'd been what's the word? I'd been I'm trying to find the right word. I want to say charged up. I'd been
Prime.
whatever. I don't know. Primed. Thank you. I've been primed going into this movie because I read Dracula last year. I was really into it. And then I'd recently just finished reading Salem's Lot, which is Stephen King's take on Dracula. He's like, let me take the Dracula story. Let me take a modern times version, which takes place in the 70s when the book was written. But let me take my version of kind of the exact same story, but do it in a small town in Maine. And Dracula like basically turns everyone into vampires. And so I was already primed going into this movie, thinking about that movie, thinking about all of like how the crosses work, all the water, like holy water, how they fight the vampires, all that stuff. I was like all primed. And then going into this movie, I was excited. And then it was like a lot of letdown and a lot of just like, this movie really has no faith in its own self. Like it was
So
just
what about
like,
this?
oh, wait.
What about
that's
how
where
I've
that's where
said-
my head's at. Where it's like, at least Insidious, I was like, okay, it's a part of an ongoing lore. There was at least some kind of I still felt like the idea that the sins of the father narrative that they established in this movie, I thought that at least that was, because going back after the fact, finding out this movie's the true third movie in the series as far as like the events. I was like, okay, like that's interesting. Like I like the idea that like he keeps thinking his dad's this horrible, horrible person, and he had to leave his mom, and then he finds out that like, oh no, your dad was just dealing with the same crap that you're dealing with, that you are dealing with your son. And like, at least at the end of the day, it has a core story where those things all kind of fit together. And then I also think that at least the plot's still there, even though I know you guys didn't really like the college bits where they were like going to, it's Insidious in college, but like it felt like it wasn't necessary because of how that landed. I still thought that was inventive, and I also did like
puking on his face, like that. All that. Shit.
I liked that element of, and I guess because again I hadn't seen the first one, I didn't know any of this going in, but I liked that element of like seeing the dead and then seeing like they're relit, like basically how she describes is like they're reliving their worst thing over and over and over again. They're in hell,
which is horrific.
Hell.
Which is horrific.
And I think the thing is that this kind of goes back to our John Wick versus Mission Impossible argument. I think this just, maybe it's just me.
Fun factor.
I tend to find, not the fun factor. I think it's not fun factor. It's more when I think about those two movies, one is just more of like the blatant, what's the most blatant crass way of doing something to make it interesting versus what's the more subtle, interesting, how do we make this interesting way. And I felt like the Demeter kind of goes, like, one of the biggest flaws I think directing wise with the Demeter is like how many times we have to see the monster, because it was like, oh, this guy's my buddy, I want to, he was in my last big movie, I want to put him in this movie, we got to put him as a creature. We're like, oh, this is a creature feature now, and it's like, no, buddy, this is not a creature feature. This is a movie where you don't show the monster, you hide those moments for very specific things. And this movie was
did
like,
in the beginning. And then by the end, like, fucked it up.
It's like we're seeing it all the time, and I was just like, okay. Whereas like Insidious, like there's not that equation, because it's not a creature feature necessarily. It's more of like a weird spooky ghost thing.
And maybe the boy kind of discovering this power, rediscovering this power, and
right. And there's more
for
going
me. What
on.
It comes down to, though, dude. What it comes down to is it kind of everything you've just said kind of hints at like what I've always said about the essence of any given franchise, where you have the essence of a shit ton of Dracula movies, and then the essence of what is only 5 Insidious movies, right?
Right.
And how this Dracula iteration was kind of a frustrating one. I mean, how many vampire / Dracula movies are there that
there's
establish
like 30
rules and follow them?
When I was reading and doing research, there's like 30 movies that are based off of just the book Dracula, but that's not vampire movies. That's just Dracula.
Yeah.
So
and
like
that
to varying
just
degrees,
5
right?
Insidious movies, and so the Red Door, I said, was just like an unnecessary movie, but like that's the sad thing here, is that what should have been like, oh, we're finally gonna get the full story of the Demeter, long time coming, in the end just feels like scraping the bottom of the barrel, because they didn't really put all that much care into it. And on top of that, I got feelings of like, this should have been like the first movie of the Dark Universe, and it should have like popped
I love
things
that
off.
take. I love that idea that they're like, if we could go back in time and like pitch them and be like, we're going to be Kevin Feige for Universal, and we're not going to call it the Dark Universe, we're going to call it the Monster Universal Monsters. We're not going to put Universe, we're just calling it the Universal Monsters.
Yeah, maybe
franchise,
not even name it.
Fuck. And then we were doing it, and like I would like, that would be, instead of like, okay, Dracula is such a rich book, instead of just doing Dracula as one movie, let's like break it up into pieces, and like now we can put characters and like actually like kind of expand it out a little bit. We know what time period this takes place, so it's not that far removed from Frankenstein, so we can even like connect lore from because we can do whatever we want. We can connect lore from Frankenstein and start there. We make them all period piece movies, but then like maybe later on we introduce like the Mummy, or introduce these things that take place later, and then bring back characters but they're older. There's so many cool things you could have done, but I do like that idea of like, this was like one of the movies in that franchise, and it was just like, it just set up like maybe there was a movie prior to this, and then this movie was like a piece of the Dracula trilogy or something like that, and then you could have had a character that would have gotten on the boat from the previous movie, that would have led into some of like then we could have had that character that was like Ripley, right? Like Ripley could have been, maybe it's not Jonathan Harker, maybe it's just another character.
Dr. Jekyll ends up being Clemens, like just
maybe that's something like that, and then
he ends up being the guy who's there. It's like, what is this? What is this devilry? And like, like that could have been crazy, but maybe it's ridiculous to have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde right there, like trying to survive as Dracula. But like, we've never seen that before. That would be the whole point.
That's when you get, and that's when you're making like, because that's the thing about universe movies, crossover movies. Like if you go way back to the 40s when they were making the monster movies, what had happened was Dracula and Frankenstein got released as films, and they were released in the early 30s. Late 20s, early 30s. I think they were 29. I don't think they were in the 30s. They were both released around that time. They got re-released, and people were like, dude, these movies are awesome. And so many people went and sell both of those films. So then they were like, oh, you know what? We need to make more of these monster movies. Yeah. So they ended up making...
What else we got?
we got also got so then what they ended up doing is they made sequels to both of those, but then they also made the Invisible Man, they made the Wolfman, and the Wolfman series is interesting because the Wolfman doesn't ever kind of like Man of Steel, he never had a direct sequel that was just the Wolfman. What happened was they made the Wolfman. The second Wolfman movie is Wolfman meets Frankenstein. So it's a movie where he fights Frankenstein's monster. And then the following movie is this big, basically Avengers style movie where it's like all the
like
monsters come together.
Kind of like the Hulk. They never give the Hulk. They give the Hulk one movie, and then they never gave him his own movie after that. He was always combined with somebody.
He's always attached to some of these other movies. So like that would have been fun if that was how the Dark Universe was going to be. It was like they picked one of these monsters and they're like, he's not going to have his own movie, but he's always going to be like the through line connection to the other ones. So, I don't know. That's why again. So back to my argument. I just feel like Insidious: The Red Door at least has a more compelling story at its heart. And at least has that because we don't really get what the fuck the story was other than acceptance in a world that we don't quite like, a world that doesn't accept you. And it's like
that's the theme.
And then
the theme is like
versus
shit happens is the theme. Like nihilism.
Life is
cold and unfair, and children die right in front of you. Children die, and then they come back to life and burst into flames in front of you and burn you horribly.
But like at least Insidious is something like at least at the end of the day, Insidious is about parents and like the
final
trauma
scene.
The trauma
that final scene between him and the dad was pretty great. Where it's just like remember the final painting, and it was like it was the dad holding the son with the lantern, like that. That at least had some kind of meaning, whereas the ending of this movie sucked. The ending of this was like the ending of this seriously felt like it was left over from the Dark Universe, like some vestigial scene that was just like we need to lead into the next movie. And so he's like Clemens is like, I will hunt this beast down until he's dead. And it was like, what the fuck, Clemens? Like, you're done. Like, get out of here. He survived. Like, go away. But for some reason, he's inviting himself to a sequel. It was a mess. It was a fucking mess. At least Insidious was closing a chapter.
Well, he's actually next year they've announced already. They announced Clemens is coming back in the sequel to Plane. It's called Boat. There's a movie called Boat that's coming out next year.
Yeah.
So
wait, was it Boat or
those
Ship?
Two characters are gonna.
Was it Boat? Was it Boat or Ship?
Maybe it's Ship. But yeah, next year we're getting Ship, I think, which is the sequel to Plane. So I'm like on the one hand, I can't wait. On the other hand, I'm like, that's so stupid. Charlie, really, the only reason I wanted to whittle down an argument is because I just feel like Plane and again, the essence of an August and a January movie is like it feels right. They're right next to each other. They're not the worst movies. I don't even like this list. When I look at it, I'm like, it's I'm not saying the list is messed up. I think it's more or less like it's not a pure it's not like if I looked at a movie and said the middle of the list or the bottom of the list was necessarily a bad, terrible, awful movie. You would probably say that, but I would say that's like they're not that great of movies.
This list is just 2023. It doesn't encompass all.
But it's
movies
not even
ever made.
all. It's not even all of 2023. So it's just like this.
Yeah.
Like it. Like if I was making a thing, I would say like great, and then mid, and then okay, and then terrible. You know, like that's how it would kind of.
Like
know,
the top three are masterful,
right?
And then it's like
really great popcorn movies,
and then good, and then not good, and then bad, and then fuck off. Essentially,
pretty much.
This movie's where does fuck off begin?
I don't like. It was like if you
like below Renfield begins fuck off for me.
Yeah,
roughly.
I liked like okay, like if I'm looking at this list, I'm like the movies that grind my gears are still movies that are like above certain movies. Like Scream 6 always annoys me just because of like certain things that the movie does. Like that always just like, ugh, why is that movie here? But that's kind of with but like the last Voyage of the Demeter, I didn't completely hate it. I wasn't like I didn't leave it the movie like you did on this one.
I left this movie just kind of like, okay. I didn't leave this hating it. Whereas like Like Knock at the Cabin, I think I left hating it.
I thought it was okay. I wasn't wowed.
I mean, I'm on record saying that Barbie was the hardest movie to get through on this list. It was extreme. I mean, but Barbie and Cocaine Bear.
I could disagree.
Sure.
completely on
Barbie
that. I'm
and
like,
Cocaine
no.
Bear were torture devices specifically designed to
injure you.
destroy my brain matter.
Got it.
Knights of the
Okay.
Zodiac was like
That
funny.
was
It was funny
That
how
was
bad
the
it
hardest
was.
fucking thing to watch.
Yeah,
I wanted to leave
It
the
was
movie
hard to
theater.
watch. Haunted
only
Mansion
time-
also was like, please end. Please
Haunted
stop.
Mansion, I was at least
And,
into the movie
you know.
enough to be like, okay, I had my own personal bias because I've worked on it, but like at least
Yeah.
that movie had like stuff that I was like, okay, I'm still kind of on board. I want to see where this goes, but like it was annoying.
Yeah.
It's like an annoying kid you were stuck with in the back of the bus for a 2-hour trip.
Anyway, I just refilled some. We are. Let me just. I haven't read it in a while. Let me read. I did
All right,
read
you read
up
the
on
list.
some shitty Seagrams, so we can
Okay.
toast. But I'll read the list real quick, which is
All right.
Oppenheimer, Beau Is Afraid, Infinity Pool, Guardians 3, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning Part 1, John Wick 4, Tetris, Air, Creed 3, Sound of Freedom, The Flash, Fast X, Asteroid City, Spider-Man Across the Universe, Shazam, Fury of the Gods, Dungeons and Dragons, Honor Among Thieves, Megan, Missing, The Machine, Barbie, and Indiana Jones 5, Scream 6, Super Mario Bros. 1, Ant-Man 3, Renfield 1, Evil Dead 5, The Pope's Exorcist, Magic Mike's Last Dance, Transformers, Rise of the Beast, Knock at the Cabin, Insidious, The Red Door, The Last Voyage of the Demeter, Plane, Haunted Mansion, Cocaine Bear, and Knights of the Zodiac. 36. We're just over halfway through the year, so 36. I mean, we're above where we should be. But hopefully by the end of the year, we'll get into we'll maybe backtrack and do certain things that
we need to. Well, we need to backtrack because I did see TMNT, and I think it is definitely like if I'm looking at this list right now.
Let's dude, I would do it tomorrow. When do you want to do it? Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday.
Well, I don't know if I can do it tomorrow.
When do you want to do it?
What time I would love to do it tomorrow, but I have to work tomorrow. But I don't know what time I get off.
I'm saying let's do it whenever. I do it Tuesday.
If I get off, if I figured out what time I'm getting off tomorrow, I'll be like, yeah, we'll do it. I'll just throw something together.
Cool. I'll try to go see it tomorrow then, and we can talk about it as soon as we can.
I think it's a top list contender. I really think it was a great animated movie. Like not top, but top tier list. You know.
Yeah, it's not gonna be. TMNT is not gonna be.
Not gonna beat Oppenheimer. Not saying that.
Yeah.
But I think it's definitely above some of the middle movies in that list. I won't say. Maybe you'll figure it out.
Nick Cage.
Oh, sorry, that was a leftover. Sorry. Oh, we're gonna go with Bram Stoker. So Charlie and I were talking about it, and we were like thinking, like, who do you toast to this movie? Like, who is there to toast? I don't think any of the here's the thing. I don't think any of the actors are bad in this movie per se. They don't but nobody rings like I'm like, man, it's so good. I think it makes a lot of sense to because we did toast Nick Cage on the last Dracula movie, but I think with this one, it makes a lot of sense to toast to the author of the original book because he's been such an iconic, influential book that he wrote that to this day, over 100 years, we are still making.
We're still scraping the bottom of his barrel to come up with fresh stories to tell. And I would say my cynical take
this
would
one
be
works as far as
yes. But my cynical take would be let's toast to the man who knew that this story in particular was only good for 5 pages and didn't need to be expanded out into anything new. And that's me saying that knowing that we've talked on different episodes, Bond episodes, about how it's bullshit when people say you take The Hobbit. You can't take The Hobbit and expand it into 3 movies. Yeah, of course you can. You can if you handle it right. But this story, as I said in my opener, this story, as it was told, it should have been. If it had been told better, I wouldn't be saying what I'm saying right now. But as it was told, it should have been a piece of a larger story. and that
But it
larger
is.
story
Well,
should have
that's-
been the
that's
Dark
what it-
Universe or whatever. So
Or
to
something.
Bram, who knew that the last voyage of the Demeter should have only been 5 pages in his greater novel that we praise him for and continue to praise him for through time, a couple or no, 100 and some years later. So I
over
keep saying
120, I
Bram.
think.
Is it to Bram? Is it specifically Bram?
Brom. I've always said Brom. But we called it the Demeter.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they keep
Well,
calling
yeah,
it
again,
Demeter.
again,
So
you and I
maybe
say
we're wrong.
you and I say Demeter because we went to school with a guy named Demeter.
That's right.
Which, by the way, is the goddess of agriculture. That's why in the beginning of the movie,
Harvest.
the masthead is she's holding wheat and thresher, right? Because she's goddess
that's
of
like
the harvest
there's a
and
connection.
agriculture and all that.
But there's a connection there, right? With like it's a harvest, but like he's harvesting the
Yes,
people on the ship.
he's cutting them and eating them and all
eating
that
them.
shit. So
I don't
anyway,
know,
so
maybe that's the connection. I don't know.
to potato Bram, Mr. Stoker, not Stroker, you perverts. It's not
Quit
Stroker.
saying
It's Stoker,
sucker off.
goddammit.
Suck him off.
Yeah, talking about sucking off kids. to Bram Stroker. Cheers to you, sir. And the Demeter.